All right. Hello, everybody. A little bit early, but that's mostly because I started the waiting room or the timer uh a little too late. I lost track of time just a tiny bit. But that's all well and good. It feels considerably cooler than it actually is in my room, but hopefully that will be remedied by me going into Mario Kart Wii Online, starting to sweat like a sweat lord, and watching the debate. Which I do actually have pulled up, I think. Yeah, there we go. Look at that. Nice. Hit B by accident. Never mind. I don't know why that happened, but okay. Anywho, let me get this debate rolling. Once I'll try to I'll start up the online stuff first, and then I will get the debate going. I took a look at the VOD from last time. I took a look at that video to make sure that the audio wasn't too out of whack. And I think the audio balancing, I'm actually pretty happy with where the audio balancing was there. I might just need to turn down the desktop audio a touch more. There we go. And then the microphone should be fine. I believe I've mentioned this before, but I don't want any of the audio to be overpowering. I don't want it to be difficult to hear my voice over the video or the game. Uh, and likewise, I don't want the video to be so quiet that you have a hard time hearing it while I'm talking or while the game audio is playing. So,
too far ahead into the
but
future because I'm conditioned by what exists now. Again, I'm a pragmatist and materialist. But if I had to
so
guess, I think a
like
communist
last time,
America would
have my finger
embark
on the
on
K button.
a very heavy emphasis on the building of large infrastructure, industry, and most importantly, rapid acceleration of the productive forces, ushering in a fourth industrial revolution much faster than we currently are doing now.
So it would have to be a cultural thing. It would have to be everybody agrees, we're all gonna.
Oh my god. I forgot where this debate led. So this is more of Haas like this is kind of a similar thing to what Stalin did with the Soviet 5-year plan. There's nothing wrong on the surface with like further industrialization and things like that. Like if you could lay out a cohesive economic plan for a fourth industrial revolution, like revitalizing American infrastructure, whatever that would be probably a perfectly good policy idea. The problem is just that Haas wants the means of production to be owned by the state and not owned in common. He doesn't support a democratic ownership over the means of production. And then Tim Pool just comes in and is like, "So you mean like it's a cultural thing?" Because he's obsessed with 1350 and that shit. So I guess
Like the
that's
space
where we're at
project,
right
right?
now.
Like all America was super unified and we loved the
Before,
space race.
yes, if you understand Antonio Gramsci, who's one of the most important theorists of Marxism, before political power can be achieved, some kind of cultural foundation of communism, of communist hegemony, must be built. But most people confuse Gramsci for the phrase "the long march through the institutions." That doesn't come from Gramsci. It comes from a
Rudi Dutschke.
Rudi Dutschke, right, who was a dissident in East Germany, who opposed the actually existing socialist system and fled to West Germany and kind of became a new leftist,
Soy
third worldist,
yes.
and so on. So,
I like third worldism. That's pretty cool, I think.
no,
I don't want to get too much into that because that's a separate topic, but
Bromsky believed that you build a foundation of cultural hegemony by
by the way, I actually he's citing authors here that I have not read. I can't speak to any of these authors are saying. So I'm gonna I guess I'll just reserve comment for when he argues something in the affirmative or whatever instead of saying like this author says this, which I'm sure they do. Uh, I guess if it seems like he's going to use that as his argument, then I'll comment on how I feel about that. But right now, actually, before I continue, I want to say a quick thank you to Yoreni 2 for the follow. It followed last time, but it was just as stream ended, I think.
Having a foundation in the working class, building institutions that are funded by the working class collectively, that are upheld by them, that are maintained and reproduced by the working class.
How does the working class determine what to fund?
Organization. You create organizations. First of all, you create perhaps businesses. Today, there's a ton of possibilities. I mean, even having a YouTube show that you can garner millions and millions of viewers of working class people, that's a form of communist capital you can build. You can have businesses.
Okay, now this is just total nonsense coming from Haas here, because in a communist system there would be no such thing as capital. The point of communism is that you would eliminate capital. That's how you get capitalism. The capital in capitalism means that, like, it's this money, it's this, like, well, I don't want to say capital too many times, but it is capital that, like, reproduces itself. It concentrates itself in such few hands and things like that. I don't think Haas is actually arguing in favor of communism here so much as he is arguing in favor of, like, a somewhat restructured version of capitalism. State capitalism seems to be the name of the game here. Like I said, he is a Stalinist and wants the state to own the means of production and not the the workers, the working class.
That's not communist. That's private venture. If people choose to give
Yeah,
you money,
and
then I use that
Timple's
money for what I
correct to
wanna
point
do
that
with it.
out.
Sure, but it's conducive to the aims of a communist movement, which is to build a form of cultural hegemony. Obviously, that's going to be within the system we live in now.
See, that's the issue I'm trying to understand, because I don't think that's communism, right? That doesn't seem to make sense. I think culturalism, perhaps, like the mission we have here is we produce content, we have a show,
Yeah,
we
fucking
try
God, the
to,
cultural-
we have our varying
culture-
opinions on the show,
culture shit.
and then people choose to give us money, we use that money towards ideological ends.
Well,
Like,
the premises of a communist economic system, those are material. You cannot voluntarily.
By the way, I don't know if you guys caught it, but Tim Pool let slip that one of the main purposes of his show is to use money to make money to influence people's beliefs and shit like that. Tim Pool's show, it's pretty well known, is funded by larger right-wing interests. There's always been more capital on the right than there has been on the left, partially because the right is interested in preserving the status quo while the left is interested in changing it and uprooting it. And preserving the status quo is pretty easy, and you make a lot of friends in powerful places doing that because that would be to their interest. Yeah. And I guess that's just part of Tim Pool's right-wing grifty repertoire.
create communism. The prediction of Marx and Engels and of Marxism in general is
I
that,
know.
according to historical and material laws, the capitalist mode of production, within the seeds of capitalist production itself, lies a transition into socialism and communism. And I think they've been vindicated, actually, because another view I have is that technically, I'm
explain
not
in a
too.
minute.
I like to use terms that people understand. So when I say we live in capitalism, it's just I'm referring to an institution. But technically speaking, I don't think we actually live in a capitalist mode of production.
Okay, I'll come back to that in a minute because I want to know what he says because I think he's wrong if he says that. But he is correct. Marx and Engels did say this, and I think they're correct in saying this, that this is not just true of capitalism, but in every system is planted the seeds of downfall of that system. Within capitalism, there are the seeds to destroy capitalism. Within feudalism, there were planted the seeds to destroy and supplant feudalism. So on and so forth. You could argue this about any system, and you would be correct to do so. Every system that humans have produced, or could produce, has its flaws by which it could be supplanted or deconstructed from the inside. And what he said about a socialist transition, I actually believe that as well. This is part of the reformist socialist vision, which ultimately, at the end of the day, I am not a reformist through and through. I do believe that eventually there is going to have to be a socialist revolution for a socialist world to become real. But it is possible to achieve a large part of that transition through reform. For example, market cooperatives are a type of business where the employees own and run the business. There is no such thing as like just a CEO or board of directors or shareholders and whatnot. It is all collectively owned. The business is collectively owned by the workers. And I think that that's probably where the transition from capitalism to a form of market socialism exists. And then you can use that from there. Once you have completely socialized the market economy, then you can transition away from a market economy into a proper socialist economy that would not rely on money, that would use something like labor vouchers and things like that. Or that would rely more on syndicalist principles of organization than anything. That is super complicated all on its own, but just know that it is possible to at least get a very large part of the way from capitalism to socialism without ever having to do violent acts of revolution. And things like that. And I'll wait for this golden to run up a bit. Of course, I did mention as well, Haas said there, or Haas is about to say why he believes that we don't currently live in a capitalist mode of production. To be clear, a capitalist mode of production is just a world where businesses, resources, and the means of production are owned privately by business owners, by private organizations, by like by a class of people. We call them the bourgeoisie. That those are the people that own all the capital, all the stuff, and all the means of producing that stuff. And then there's the other class, the proletariat, that does not own any of that stuff. That is the working class. It fell off. All right, let's play again.
Anymore. I think
I agree.
we've gotten rid of commodity money. According to Marxism, that's central to capitalist production. Money must be a commodity,
crypto
right?
bullshit.
Gold, for example. Money today is fiat money. Okay, so when currency itself, when exchange value itself is political, we can't talk about living in a capitalist system anymore. Also, the information.
Okay, money does not have to be a commodity token form in order for the world to be capitalist. The only requirement is that things be owned privately by a owner class of people. The monetary theory is such that there have been times in capitalist history where just in capitalist history, so like the past 500 years, we've actually gone back and forth a couple of times with respect to what kind of money we have, whether it's fiat money or token money. And that doesn't by itself have any bearing necessarily on whether or not we live in a capitalist world.
Economy, I think, has done a lot to accelerate a transition into a post-cap.
And of course, the difference between token money and fiat money is I think I mentioned this last time with the gold standard, where token money is something that you could tie to a physical object in terms of value. So like, oh, what makes a dollar worth a dollar? Well, it's because it's worth this much amount of gold, and that's a physical thing. But fiat money, what makes a dollar worth a dollar? It's just public trust and like the social convention that this money is worth this much, which is not super difficult to maintain, as we've seen since the disconnection of money from the gold standard. It's just that the curve of inflation sort of affects that. But again, that is its own discussion. And what I'm trying to say here is that when Haas says we're not in a capitalist world because we have fiat money instead of token money, he's wrong to say that.
Capitalist economy. I don't think enterprises are purely profit-based anymore. I think that there's this...
ESG.
Yeah, exactly. Precisely that. So,
I don't know what Tim Pool just said there, but it is absolutely not the case that enterprises aren't profit-based. Enterprises all run almost entirely on the basis of profit. Obviously, for-profit businesses, I don't need to make the argument for that. That's self-evident in the name and type of business that it is. But even nonprofits and nominally public-facing and public service institutions have started to become more driven by balancing their checkbook and by making a profit and remaining in the black. If anything, the world has become more profit-driven and more capitalistic over time with the presence of capitalism. That tends to be a thing. This track is wacky.
You know, building a communist movement is going to be this is what Marx said. The premises of the communist movement are now in existence. So yes, communists can open small businesses to create a hegemony and fund a movement. Is that a capitalist relation of production? Maybe, but is it one also within a wider transition, regardless of what we do? Yes, also.
Okay, I do agree with that.
Communism doesn't come from the sky. It comes from the premises now in existence. So, you know,
I do agree with what Haas said there. So, when you're talking about social revolutions and whatever, it is possible for someone to be ideologically communist and own a business, or to otherwise participate in the capitalist world, you know? And that includes owning things that are part of the process of production. You know? Because to not engage with the system is to not take your own struggle seriously. And this has historically been the case as well. Engels was a wealthy business owner who was ideologically committed to principles of socialism and communism, and bankrolled a lot of Marx's research and writings as a way to help the communist movement. And the same is true of other movements before the age of like capitalism and socialism and communism, and whatnot. You could look back at a feudalist country, and the pro-capitalist people there would have to engage with feudalism in order to achieve what they wanted to. Can't believe that worked. I'm really not driving well. No. Damn it.
Lenin said this. It's kind of an idea to get the view of what communists believe, but it's kind of gruesome a little bit. But it's, you know, understand it metaphorically. You hang the capitalist with a rope, he sells you. But I don't believe in the violence. You understand, it's like you're destroying the system through the system itself.
Haas is less radical than I am.
Well, you know, to say you don't believe in the violence, Haas, you know, you've got, you know, the invasion going on the Ukraine right now. You've got threats to invade Taiwan. You've got Russia's puppet. Threats, Haas. You know, you've got, you know, the invasion going on the Ukraine right now. You've got threats to invade Taiwan. You've got Russia's puppet. You know, Iran creating mayhem in Israel. You know,
let's. I don't really want to focus on that too much, but like, Iran is not Russia's puppet, and also Iran is not really responsible for the shit happening in Israel right now. Again, separate discussion, but I think he's just alluding to the conflict and instability that we're experiencing, which is definitely a thing that's happening.
You know, these are all violent things, but we'll get back to an area. You talked about the mass line before. People need to understand what the mass line is. That's a Maoist term. And that the theory is you go to the people, they give you the ideas, and you come up with a mass line, and everybody must do it. Well, we saw the mass line during COVID. We see the mass line through Black Lives Matter, which is a Maoist construct. We saw
based if true, but Black Lives Matter is not Maoist.
Saw the mass line in transgenderism. You cannot challenge transgenderism. You could not challenge.
Yeah, because you'll get blown the fuck out by normal people. Also, I don't know what he means by challenge transgenderism exactly. Like, he should be clear with what he means here, but I mean, you kind of have to be oblique if you're a right-winger, because if I had to hazard a guess, what he probably means is tell trans people that they're not actually trans and that they're just mentally ill, which I'll be the first to say it. A lot of trans people are mentally ill. That doesn't mean their feelings are any less valid. I'm mentally ill. You wouldn't, challenge me if I were to say, yeah, I think I'm a cis guy. That's what I think of myself, right? Because I am a cis guy, But I feel like this guy's mostly just talking bullshit about the mass line. I think what he's doing is trying to just use a very sinister sounding term to refer to culturally hegemonic stances and opinions that people accept as like normal, which he has to do because the things that he supports are fucking insane. And so he has to make them sound less insane by making them sound like the maverick outsider position. You know,
the masks, lockdown, vaccines mantra, you could not challenge that. That was enforced through the World Health Organization, which is controlled completely by the CCP. And by let me finish. I gave you a good go. And so this is enforced here by pro-Chinese politicians, pro-Chinese unions in our state. We saw communism through COVID. We saw communism through Black Lives Matter. We're seeing communism now with the transgender movement. We saw communism with the fact that you cannot challenge election results. This is mass line.
Okay, as is the case with most people, this guy has no fucking idea what communism actually means. I legit would trust Haas to know better what communism means than this guy, and that says something, because I don't particularly trust Haas to tell me what communism is either. Ooh. And then also, you can challenge election results. This guy is most definitely an election denier who just wants to maintain his optical appearance of like reasonableness. And the reason he said that you can't challenge election results is just that. You can challenge election results. And in fact, Trump had every right to challenge the election results if he thought something was wrong with them. The courts, you know, saw it through 60 times and decided all 60 times that Trump was full of shit and that the elections were actually fine. What he's like, nobody actually thinks that there's something wrong with challenging an election. This guy just doesn't like that the election went a way that he didn't like. You know, tough shit. Sometimes you lose an election, bro. You know, it happens.
Politics in America now enforced through the CCP, through the big tech that depends on the CCP, through the institutions controlled by the CCP in this country. That is tyranny.
I gotta say, you know,
this guy has like fucking China boogeyman brain. Like, China is bad. I shouldn't have to say too much about that. But the like, you know how some people will do this thing with the Jewish question where they say like, oh, Jews control everything. This guy does that, but with the CCP and also Jews. I talked about that last time. But that, you know, just not well, it's not exactly mentally stable behavior.
Tyranny. There can be no other result of communism.
Right. You mentioned the famous line of hang the capitalists with the rope they sell you. And that, I think, describes the issue of the CCP you're describing perfectly. American institutions, big tech, for instance, they say, we want to make a bunch of money. How do we do it? In America, you can make any movie you want. Certainly don't offend the activists and, you know, the woke left or whatever, because they'll...
No, I mean, boycott. You can. You'll lose a bunch of money, because if you do something that's, like, anti-progressive, your movie's gonna flop, because it's a shit movie. Most likely. But,
it'll be a whole big nightmare, so...
What are you saying about the...
They say, we want to make a bunch of money. How do we do it? In America, you can make any movie you want. Certainly don't offend the activists and, you know, the woke left or whatever, because...
Oh yeah, also, as if you would ever have to worry about offending the activists, like that's such a big fucking institutional force. Dude, it took months and months of striking just for workers to get treated like people in Hollywood. And in some ways they didn't even get that, you know?
Because they'll boycott and it'll be a whole big nightmare. So
also boycotts don't work.
However, if we make a movie with certain things in it, people won't really care. However, if you want to release that movie in China, you got to draw the dotted lines around the South China Sea. Because China is a massive market with monetary opportunity for American companies, the American companies are going to adhere to the path of least resistance, which means in the United States, nobody cares, for the most part, if you draw 7 dotted lines around the South China Sea. In China, you have to. So what do the movies do? They just do it, which means American culture is being influenced. Google is banning people who say things like against the World Health Organization, not necessarily because, I mean, probably partly because they are ideologically aligned, but it's because they're like, look, if we want our products in China...
Okay, the reason Google is banning people for saying shit that contradicts the World Health Organization is because it's the fucking World Health Organization, and it's like a coalition of medical experts. If you say something that, like, isn't in line with the WHO, like the odds are you're peddling medical misinformation and shit. You know, like that's what's going on here. But Tim Pool has made a substantial amount of money off of pushing ivermectin and other sorts of COVID disinformation. So he pushes the line of like the WHO is this big scary boogeyman, you know.
Where we can double our revenue, we have to adhere to the CCP. It's cheaper if we just do it across the board. This means that in the United States, we will be subject to the pressures of the CCP. It is American capitalist endeavors trying to make money, bending their knee to the CCP and other dictators because it's cheaper.
And you look at you look at why is sports so woke? Because Nike controls sport. Who is Nike in bed with? Look, I am.
If they want to sell.
Look. Some libertarians say we should have free trade across the world. I completely disagree. We should be completely disengaging with China, with Vietnam, with Russia, and Iran, and Cuba.
Okay. This is a stupid talking point, and it's also a terrible idea. So, I appreciate the honesty that this guy is not pro-free trade, because he's definitely not. Because free trade leads to certain progressive prescriptions that this guy does not like. But the idea that America would be protectionist is just beyond stupid. So, America benefits from a free trade world order of things. It puts us on top because we're the biggest player in the game right now. China is one of our biggest trade partners. The United States is a global creditor. Is a global debtor. We borrow money from a lot of people, which makes us super economically powerful. China is a global creditor. They loan money to a lot of people. That makes them powerful. For however long that lasts, there's a lot of instability in the Chinese economy. That's not something I'm an expert on, though, so I will refrain from commenting further. But with respect to cutting off trade relations with Russia, Iran, China, Vietnam, that would be the United States shooting itself in the foot and single-handedly removing itself from the position of global hegemon. We need to do business with everybody. We want to do business with everybody. For better or worse, that keeps the United States on top. Would I prefer it if the United States weren't on top? Yes, but there isn't currently a better country to occupy that global hegemon spot. Unless we mean somebody like, I don't know, one of the European countries, but they're not there yet in terms of economic power. And quite frankly, there's been a lot of issues with Europe stagnating. Really, the big thing of it is that, like, the genie of globalization, of international trade relations, is out of the bottle, and we can't put that genie back in if we wanted to. And removing the capitalism from the discussion here, because international trade is going to be a thing anyway, you wouldn't want to put that genie back in the bottle. It would be very harmful to a very large number of people if you were to try to do that.
Well, absolutely disengaging, because they will not survive without our support. We are keeping them in business so they can destroy us.
Yeah, and they
keep
us in business.
This is part of the contradiction of liberalism I mentioned. But before I get into
as
that,
if anybody could
I'd like to say
destroy
two
the United
things.
States.
One is that the mass lying. I completely disagree that the COVID response in the United States, or Black Lives Matter for that matter, was an example of mass lying. How do I know this? Preceding Black Lives Matter was an injection of what I believe to be $500 million by George Soros. So it was an institutional endeavor from the top down. If it was a mass line, they would be going down to people outside of these institutions and having that inform their outlook, these activists. But they did the opposite for both COVID and Black Lives Matter. What they did was impose views synthetically created in the bubble confines of universities and tried to impose this on the people. I live in Michigan. Gretchen Whitmer was my governor. Okay, Oof. If Gretchen Whitmer did the Maoist mass line in Michigan, she would go to northern Michigan, she would go to places people are living, and actually appraise their thoughts, their feelings, their mood, and their consciousness.
Okay, here's the thing about universities. Universities have always been the premier sites of social change and social movements. There's a reason that people talk about university libs and whatever. This has always been true of universities, and that's for the better. In fact, the Hungarian Revolution of 1956 that the Soviet Union eventually put down with tanks and soldiers was led by university students, genuine socialist university students. Same thing with a lot of the anti-war marches in the United States during Vietnam. Same thing with the Tiananmen Square protests that led to, of course, the now like ubiquitously well-known image of the one guy standing on the street facing down a column of Chinese tanks. That was a university protest that the Chinese government violently put down because it was a indicator of burgeoning social change. And so don't get it mixed up. The change that happens starting from universities, the movements in universities are very real.
With regard to her lockdown measures. And if she did that, she would have been able to very easily understand.
What do you mean?
Well, she would
go around praising people, and she did arrest people who opposed her.
No. But that's not the mass line. The mass line means let me finish. You formulate your policy and you formulate your response to a given event based on your understanding of where the masses stand. And the masses in Michigan stood opposed to what Gretchen Whitmer was doing. She was out of touch, so it's the opposite of a mass line. She wasn't.
But most people were just like, it's not so much whether she's aligned with them or not. It's what are they willing to accept.
And the mass line means let me finish. You formulate your policy and you formulate your response to a given event based on your understanding of where the masses stand. And the masses in Michigan stood opposed to what Gretchen Whitmer was doing. She was out of touch, so it's the opposite of a mass line.
But
she wasn't.
But most people were just like, it's not so much whether she's aligned with them or not. It's what are they willing to accept.
But this is
but whether they're willing to accept it or not, those policies were formulated by, for example, Dr. Fauci. By that I mean by out-of-touch expert institutions. The Chinese Cultural Revolution and Maoism bombarded these institutions. They bombarded the experts. They bombarded the technical specialists and said, no, the feeling and will of the masses is more true, right? So it's.
I feel like I drove pretty well that race. Definitely better than everybody else in the room. Talking about the mass line still, a lot of this is like Haas trying to say that the American people agree with him, which they really don't. A lot of people, populists in general, will invoke popular support of certain things, and that is a very correct thing to do, especially in a nominally democratic country. But in the case of Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan, I don't think there was that much, like, as far as actual popular resistance, there wasn't that much. It was basically just the right wing that opposed her policy platform, and most people were either okay or supported it. So I don't really know what he's getting at with all the mass.
It's the opposite. Stuff. It's hyper populism. It's not the technocracy of COVID or Black Lives Matter. Now I also want to say with regard to
he wanted to respond to that.
Well, look, this is the big deception of communism. They say, well, the mass, we will consult with the people, we will formulate our ideas, and then we'll do the mass line. That's not how it works. They come up with an idea, they do these fake consultations, they say, well, the people agree with us, therefore we have a mandate to do it. That's how they do it. This is the thing. Communists talk about democracy. What is democracy to a communist? It is the will of the people. Who are the representatives of the people? The communists are the representatives of the people. So therefore...
He went the wrong way. What this guy's talking about is mostly not true. I'll go over the small part that is true afterwards, but when he's talking about, like, oh, communists don't believe in democracy, yes, they do. Like, communist, socialist people who are not Nazis do believe very strongly in democratic values. And that means allowing people to make what we would perceive to be mistakes, but changing the organizing principle of society so people are allowed to do that with more and more things. Namely, the economy is one such area where communists and socialists believe that the democratic process should be extended to, even if that means that people fuck up. The side that more frequently engages with that, in what he's talking about there, is actually the right wing. Conservatives and fascists will much more often say, like, silent majority shit, and then absolutely reject out of hand the popular opinion when it suits them, especially on social issues like trans issues. That is the actual, like, folly that he's referring to here. Although the brief bit of charitability that I'm willing to extend on this matter is the subject of manufacturing consent, because, like, people's opinions don't actually exist in a vacuum. People's opinions are shaped by the opinions of other people and institutions. So when a news media outlet is reporting on something important, that's not because people think it's important. It's because that news media outlet thinks that that is important, and by virtue of them reporting on it, now other people also think that that's important. If that makes sense, you know, it's like a circle. This guy is mostly, I think this guy is just mostly an anti-populist and has a disdain for democratic norms and tendencies.
For democracy is the will of the Communist Party. So the mass line is exactly what we saw in Black Lives Matter, a Maoist Chinese communist operation with deep connections to the Chinese consulate in San Francisco, run by the Freedom Road Socialist Organization and Liberation Road. It was completely enforced because real mass line in the real world is the imposition of the mass line from above through Tedros and the World Health Organization, a Chinese puppet, through Susan Mickey, a member of the British Communist Party who now runs the World Health Organization's
like
social conformity unit. What we saw through the transgender movement, through the COVID, was Chinese mass line enforced on this country through subservient politicians and pro-Chinese communist.
This is contradicted by a cursory examination of the facts. Okay, in China today, you go to a rural peasant who is more outside of the reach of the central government, and they're hanging a picture of Mao on their wall. And part of the reason of Xi Jinping's rise and his kind of neo-Maoism was a grassroots populism. So I completely reject the notion, and I think.
No, I think Xi Jinping is a pretty staunch anti-populist. He's a good politician. He knows what he's doing, so he'll invoke it when it's like beneficial, I think, or when he thinks he can get away with it without like a lot of hubbub. But what Haas is saying about like the genuine support for the CCP is hard to determine. I'm not going to say it's not true because there's probably at least a significant chunk of the Chinese population that does like the CCP and what they're doing, just like there are fascists in every country, so there are also fascists in China. But it is very hard to say, because China is an authoritarian state, it's hard to say how much of that is genuine support and how much of that is because people are afraid to get blacklisted by certain social institutions and government institutions, which will make it way harder for them to live their life, or will create circumstances by which it would be impossible to live their life and would potentially result in them being imprisoned.
Expert historians will probably
real quick,
project the notion that the Cultural Revolution mass line was
It is true, though, that in the hinterlands of China, you go further and further out from administrative centers, you probably wouldn't need to show the degree of support that you would need to in more urban and concentrated and observed areas. But a lot of these people, I would speculate, are probably doing it just to be better safe than sorry, you know.
synthetically created in the communist.
But just to clarify, you're saying that a rural Chinese peasant will hang pictures of Mao in reverence?
Yes, absolutely.
Is it possible that it's because they killed anyone who wouldn't?
No, because it's the same in Russia today, long after Stalinism, even in the history of the Soviet Union and today. There's no Stalinist power ruling Russia today, right? There's no repression of people against Stalin. It's to see what people in Moscow are saying, these liberals in Moscow. You go to the remote regions of Russia, those are the Stalinists. It's the ordinary people who revere Stalin. So this.
Well, the thing about that, right? First of all, liberals are actually being imprisoned in Russia. It's a big problem over there. A lot of the anti-war journalists and stuff are being imprisoned by Putin and his government, which is pretty fucked up. But the part of the reason that you might actually find some genuine Stalin support in the countryside is because those people are nationalists. A lot of people in Russia, there is a genuine sentiment that they want the Soviet Union to return, but that sentiment is nationalistic, not socialistic. Because it's all centered around the country, and the country being great, or making the country great again, as it were. You know? These races are so fucking crowded. Oh my god.
Same thing is actually true in China. So the notion of the communist mass line just
Getting
being the
bumped as hell.
imposition of the Communist Party institution.
What are you
That was
doing,
the very thing
dude?
Mao conceived.
Get outta here.
That was the very problem Mao was working against with the mass line, and his populism was
So-
authentic. There's a book I would recommend. It's called The Unknown Cultural Revolution by Dong Ping Han, and in it you'll find eyewitness accounts, and this guy is some kind of dissident in China today, but he records eyewitness accounts, records, and historical data that shows actually the Cultural Revolution was a populist uprising of Chinese peasants. It was the imposition of
That
a
is true,
people's
for sure.
dictatorship over the kind of bureaucracy
How many?
of the
How many?
party.
Do you know how many people died in the Great Leap Forward?
What the
in the Cultural Revolution?
There's no way of
Systemic,
knowing
you
for
idiot.
certain. There's the Black Book of Communism estimate. The problem with the Black Book of Communism is that 2 of the 3 authors who participated in compiling it disavowed it later and said that the editor was obsessed with reaching a total of 100 million just because.
Yeah, some say it could be
ideological
5 to 50 million.
It was a
Those
lot.
are wide
First,
estimates.
regarding the famines in both the
So-
Soviet Union and in China, yes,
And-
many
and
people died. Yes.
Do you believe the story of the sparrows and the pig iron?
Yeah, so what's going on with the Black Book of Communism and the whole like victims of communism shtick? The thing is, right? There are incredible estimates and there are credible estimates of how many people died under nominally communist systems, right? And to be sure, it was a lot of people, right? Mao's China, Stalin's Russia, whatever. A lot of people died. The problem with that is that if you turn it around, capitalism looks way worse. If you take these nominally communist countries, which I would argue is state capitalist, blah blah, you say, an estimated 20 million. Like if you spread it across all the countries, I don't know, 50 million, whatever. And then you look at capitalism in its heyday through the 19th and 20th centuries. Capitalism makes that look like chump change. In the British colonization of India alone, just in India, in one famine, 100 million people died, and the continent of India and its geopolitical situation has been irrevocably damaged by what British colonialism and a capitalist economic model did to them. So India alone is more than all of the like victims of communism shit combined. And then you could look at any other colonial travesty that went on in Africa or in Southeast Asia. Those would all be considered by the same metric victims of capitalism. But they don't do that because they don't actually care. Right-wingers like Tim Pool, like Trevor Loudon, they don't actually care about the well-being of people. They don't care about people living and dying and all that. What they care about is hierarchy. And they want the hierarchy that exists now to be maintained because they're on top. That's really it. That they don't have very much in the way of genuine political beliefs
China, do you
or
think those are historically
thoughts there.
They may be contributing factors, but overall, the reasons for famine in both the Soviet Union and China was 2 things. A combination, the most important one, I'll rank them in order, was the rapid transition to the modernization of agriculture from a pre-modern agrarian society. That caused a disruption in the food supply, because it happened in a very rapid, condensed
Here comes the whole
time period, right?
So
The second
that was it. Central planning changed how they were.
Not just
their
central
economy
planning, but see, rapid modernizations of agriculture, if you look historically, have led to the worst calamities everywhere, including in non-communist states. Accompanying English industrialization, we had the Irish potato famine, which killed more as a proportion of the Irish population than did Mao's Great Leap Forward.
I have to push back against this. So what Haas is referring to here is a real phenomenon, but he's invoking it disingenuously to excuse genocide. It is true that the changing of farming techniques over time will result in a lot of economic turmoil in a country, and could even result in some food shortages and things like that, right? Theoretically, that's a thing that can happen. However, all the famines that he mentioned there, the potato famine and the Holodomor, the Soviet grain famine in the 1920s, those were genocides. Those were intentional projects carried out by the states controlling those regions at the time. The Holodomor was an event wherein the Soviet government actually withheld grain shipments from Ukraine, or rather they took the grain from Ukraine and didn't give it back to be redistributed, which resulted in the death of something like 6 million Ukrainians through starvation, which is fucked up. And then with the Irish potato famine, which they call the Great Dying in Ireland, pretty fittingly so, I would argue, that was actually the result of the British wanting to colonize Ireland the way they did with Africa or America. And in order to do that, they actually had to thin out the population. As fucked up as that is, and as fucked up as that sounds, they needed Irish people to die. So what did they do? They claimed that they weren't home when the Irish potato blight struck. They refused to provide help. And as a result, 1 million Irish are dead, and the country still has not recovered from that catastrophe. I'm gonna find a new room.
The potato famine was the result of modernization?
Yes.
It was a result of a deliberate policy of the British to suppress the Irish.
For once, for rare W again, Trevor Loudon is right. That it was deliberate on the part of the British government that so many Irish died in the famine of 1848.
But look, this is the central lie of communism. This is the central lie of communism. Okay, we can debate whether 5 million, 50 million, 40 million died, as though that doesn't mean anything.
Of course it does.
In the face of capitalism, it doesn't mean anything. Or rather, it does mean something in the opposite direction. Like I said, 100 million people were killed in the, I think, early 1900s Indian famine just by itself. And I think the British occupation over time resulted in the deaths of, I think, 1 or 2 billion people that would not have died otherwise. Or maybe I'm getting the orders of magnitude mixed up, where the famine was 10 million and then the occupation over time was about 100 million. But regardless, you could just take that continent and it would make, again, the Soviet Union and China look like chump change.
This would never happen. Did this ever happen in America? America industrialized more rapidly than
on the back of British capital. We had access to...
Well, it doesn't matter where the capital came from.
They didn't have access to any capital.
Well, America industrialized because America had a free system.
That's not
where
true.
People could...
No.
Yeah, well, see, this is where...
The reason industrialization happens is a combination of material factors that benefits that process. I mean, that's kind of self-explanatory, or like tautological, but being in a free country does not necessarily promote or inhibit industrialization. In fact, the United States was not the first country to industrialize. Britain at the time, I don't think anybody would really argue was a free country. Of course, the United States kind of wasn't either. Britain was one of the early adopters of industrial production. And then the United States followed suit. But likewise, Russia, this guy would not argue Russia was a free country. I know he wouldn't. And Russia industrialized in the early 20th century. They were a very, very late adopter of this trend, but being a free country is not a necessary prerequisite to industrializing, nor does it even really count that much one way or the other. France, Germany, Spain, none of these were free countries as we would now know them. But they industrialized all the same. The thing that industrialization replaced was slave labor for the most part. And in that sense, you could say that every country that has industrialized was a free country because people were not slaves in those countries. But no, this guy is attributing industrialization to some weird nebulous cloud of moral values that has no bearing on economic trends and production.
I would disagree. America was great because America was free. People could invest.
Except for a large subsection of the population that may or may not have been imprisoned by result of the color of their skin. Thank you.
They could bring capital in. No. They could build factories. They could build. It was never central planning. Every time central planning.
That is true, but like I said, countries with central planning also industrialized. Think Germany in World War I, or Germany leading up to World War I. Germany had a significant degree of central planning in its economy. It's one of the textbook examples of centrally planned state capitalism. Same thing with the Soviet Union when that happened. I need to find a good opportunity.
Planning has been, you just said it, rapid transition, forced rapid transition, dislocation of the supply chains, massive famine.
So
it wasn't all accidental either. It wasn't all. Some of it, the kulaks, between 6 and 10 million kulaks deliberately starved in Ukraine.
Oh, now he's doing the fucking genocide denial. Or maybe he's arguing that, like...
Disagree, but before we get to the allegation about Ukraine, Actually, you're wrong about American industrialization. It's a big myth that the American system of economics is free trade. That was actually the British system. Adam Smith and the classical political
I'm not
economists.
saying it was free trade.
Those were the British.
It wasn't.
In America, we had something called the American system, which originates with Alexander Hamilton, and which Abraham Lincoln upheld in the apex and foundation of American industrialization, which was deliberate centralized state policy for public credit to deliberately inspire technological innovation and industrialization from the top down.
To a degree, yes, it was.
So also regarding the view that it's deliberate, look, it was condensed within a short period, but why was that? The Soviet Union, before it was even formed, after their revolution, literally half the world invaded the former Russian Empire to destroy the Bolsheviks. So Stalin in 1931, he said, we have 10 years to catch up militarily and in terms of our...
Okay, so what he said about the American system of economics is true. The United States was not always, free trade Andes, because we weren't always on top. When the British were on top, they could be, free trade and all that, because they benefited from that. But the United States actually did have to engage in protectionism, particularly with marine trade and on the high seas and whatnot. But now we do free trade because we're on top, and that's good for us. Cool.
Our industrial economy, just 10 years.
I think you just let
or
me
we
win.
Get buried by the world. Well, what happened 10 years later? The German invasion happens. So it was a matter of life or death. They had to do this if they wanted to retain their sovereignty. And to say that
Oh, yeah, but then the second thing I wanted to mention is that Haas is making excuses for the Soviet Union here. It is true that the Soviet Union underwent a lot of military turmoil in the first few years of its existence, but that is by no means an excuse for the authoritarian policymaking that it did. A certain degree of centralization I could certainly see it with respect to economic planning, but the state capitalist model was by no means inevitable, nor was it necessary.
I think there's no meaningfulness to
it is possible to have a degree of central planning while still having democratic organizing principles and socialist organizing principles, and not doing the state capitalist thing, as long as if workers are the ones running the businesses, and they send representatives up and etc.
The millions who perished. No, of course it's one of the most worst calamities in the history. And their necessity.
But there is a context to it.
But it's freedom or slavery. Do you submit to foreigners to rule over you, or do you have a sovereign economy?
Well, it's not a binary choice. It's not a binary choice.
What is happening? Somebody shit on the internet. God damn it. I dropped a ton of frames just there. Am I still live? Fucking hell. Come on, dude. Why does this happen? You serious? I'm gonna have to restart my Wii U. What is going on? The Wii U is not turning off. Oh. I feel like my monitor's out. All right, drastic times call for drastic measures. I had to physically unplug it in order to get it to turn off. I don't know if I've ever seen Mario Kart Wii just crash like that. Anyways, let me continue reviewing the debate as I try to get the game back.
It was for them.
There's a reason why. There's a reason why I asked this question,
yeah,
right?
true.
So, in this period in China, are you more or less likely to survive if you are pro Mao?
Probably yes, but that's also
more likely. I mean,
but a lot of that is part of what you mentioned earlier, which is the kind of unwritten cultural kind of thing.
Right, but that's
if you go on stage, you get attacked or something.
So in the Great Leap Forward, in the Cultural Revolution, if you are directly challenging these plans and what Mao was doing, would that negatively impact your life?
I couldn't say, because it was so.
I mean, of course it would, but I mean, so would challenging a lot of political status quos or prominent political movements in a lot of countries. Like, I don't think there are arguments that you could make against Mao and the Cultural Revolution in China. This is not one of them. At least it's not a very good argument, because you could say the same thing about the American Revolution in the 13 colonies. You know, when that was all happening, it was certainly the case that you'd probably be more likely to die if you were anti-independence than if you were pro-independence, because then the American revolutionaries would be a little bit less charitable towards you. They'd be a little bit less considerate of your needs because you were a British loyalist and whatever. You were a political opponent of theirs. But like this, you know, those were during the circumstances of the actual fight itself. Like, if you want to argue that Mao's China was authoritarian, you could argue about like Mao essentially just replicating the structure of the old Chinese empires, but with the cultural sort of the cultural inertia stripped away. You could argue, that like China is not a democratic system, and there isn't. After the revolution happened, there wasn't any political dissent allowed in government and stuff like that. You really arguing about whether or not certain things would lead you to be alive or dead in revolutionary circumstances while a violent revolution is actively happening is not a great argument to make. And I think it would be better if you argued that, like, I guess if he's arguing against Mao's China, right? He should do it from a perspective of the revolution already having been done and Mao having seized power already. Because then I might agree. But as far as the revolution goes, I think it was a good thing that the revolution happened in China at such a time that it did and whatever. Mao was a skilled revolutionary and a skilled fighter, but a terrible leader.
So much chaos during that period that even people who were fervently pro-Mao, this is part of the horrible tragedy.
So you're saying that those photos we have of the struggle sessions and everything, those could have
that happened later. That happened a decade later during the Cultural Revolution.
That's why I said the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution.
Oh, okay. The Cultural Revolution, yes, there was a lot of violence.
So my point is, in these periods, were you more or less likely to survive if you were for communist these revolutionary changes?
If you were pro-Mao, but here's the thing. Even during the Cultural Revolution ultimately was ended in failure. Mao himself admitted this. It ended in the factionalism of Red Guards because it wasn't enough just to support Mao. You had to prove it authentically, right? So this led to an atmosphere where these student Red Guards would start killing each other and attacking each other because of
Yeah, that's probably why that the Cultural Revolution was such a failure, is because of that, like, insane purity testing. Purity testing is never usually a good idea. To the nth degree. It is the case that you want people to be like, I mean, in order to have a political movement, you generally want people to agree with the mission of that movement. But you want to keep the infighting to a bare minimum. Because you want to focus on the greatest common denominator that exists, and that represents a massive failure to do that. And of course, there's also all of the not espionage, surveillance and stuff.
Purity tests.
Yeah. But here's the thing: what happened to them?
We have in American society now.
Real quick, when in the period of like a week, the word Womixen, WOMXN, was considered the politically correct way to refer to females.
I just cringed so hard that my spleen exploded. No. And no. No. I'm gonna go with no on that. And also, no is not correct. Let me get it one more. Let's get that concentrated dose of cringe.
MXN was considered the politically correct way to refer to females.
Okay. The second thing, just no, is that he refers to women as females. This is peak incel shit right here. You should say, if you're talking about women, you should say women. I think that's generally how you should approach the issue. If you're talking about cis women, you should say cis women. If you're talking about trans women, you should say trans women. What you should not do is say females. That's some shit that a biologist says when they're talking about sexual dimorphism in a species that they're dissecting under a microphone. These people do not go out into the sunlight. They're basically vampires. What you're doing by talking this way is revealing that you, like them, are also a vampire who has never seen the light of day and has never known the touch of a woman. But you're also doing it without any of the street cred that comes with actually knowing how biology works and having a degree in any of the physical sciences. So basically, fattest L imaginable in like one sentence. Disgusting.
And then that sparked a backlash where they said it was trans exclusionary. So the attempt at wokeness created multifactional internal wokeness conflicts.
I remember that discourse. I think it was stupid. The correct side to take is that nobody uses womex and fucking just say women or woman, whatever. Fucking, I think that was a Twitch TV thing. Nobody actually uses those terms. Like, if you say Latinx in the presence of like Hispanic people, they will hit you with a sandal. Like, no, just don't.
It's meant to do.
If you say it in my presence, I will hit you with something harder than a sandal.
It's meant to divide.
I agree there is a parallel, but I would want to repeat a quotation by Karl Marx. He said, "History always repeats itself, first as the tragedy and second as farce." And I think this is an example of how the capitalist West is actually behind the history of communism now. We are catching up to the communists in China because China doesn't have this issue anymore because Mao sent the students down to the countryside. They learned from the excesses and the mistake.
I actually don't know what he's talking about, but also no. This is some like, oh, the West is 100 quintillion bajillion years behind. And it's like the fucking dumbass TikTok CGI videos where the cars are getting blown up by various Rube Goldberg machines when they're trying to like cross a crosswalk in front of a person who's walking there. By the way, based if that was real, but it's not real, so. And like when people show basic farming techniques of like people that live the life of like or working class person in the rural hinterlands and whatever, and they're like, look how far ahead China is of the West. Like, dog, you just posted a video of a guy farming. Like, okay, people do that here too.
I also disagree. Despite all of its failures and despite the tragedy of the Cultural Revolution, there was still something there that was authentic, an authentic attempt to rediscover the authentic basis of communism based on belief, based on devotion to the cause. In America, that's not what you have. There's no actual real cause or real unifying belief people are devoted to. When someone calls you, for example, transphobic, they're not saying you are standing in the way.
I mean, he's basically just virtue signaling to be pro-China here for, like, almost just for the sake of it. This doesn't really mean anything. Like I said, you will find people of every ideological conviction in every country on Earth. That's not gonna change one way or the other.
Of the glorious people's triumph or something. There's saying, well, you're just personally a bad person. You're a piece of shit for being a transphobe or whatever. So it's not even really politicized. They don't even directly acknowledge that there's a level of responsibility. There's a stake in it. It's just kind of seamlessly understood or conceived to be like, oh, I'm a normal person, right? The Red Guards, for all their faults, right, at least were devoted to one cause, one ideology, and most importantly, even if they failed in doing it, authentically giving expression
I'm driving to
the will of their people. Woke people don't care about doing
right.
that.
So here's the bad news, I guess, for you. I think that I'm not gonna pretend that I know what's true or not in terms of conspiracy or stuff, but it is fascinating to me that you've got powerful interests in the intelligence agencies that are very, very pro woke, and they have aligned wokeness with communism. Well, because the end result of much of the policies or ideas of wokeness is deep.
You might be referring to the one ad from the CIA that included a Latino woman, about like, I'm Latinx and I feel accepted, like top 10 signs that this is not a real person or whatever, But the reason that wokeness, as he calls it, which by the way basically just means not hating women and minorities and gay people, the reason that is like hegemonically accepted in a lot of cultural institutions or not cultural institutions, in like the intelligence agencies now, and in a lot of government institutions in the United States, is because there is a much more progressive cultural hegemony among the population, not only of the United States, but around the world. Especially like in Latin American countries, it has been increasingly the case that the population is pro-trans and pro-queer and accepting of like indigenous minorities and things like that. And so the CIA and other intelligence agencies actually have to play to that if they want to successfully embed themselves in a foreign population and do their thing with the, foreign interference and whatever. Granted, the U.S. has actually toned back the amount of military coups it's been doing lately in Latin America. But that is why you get stuff like the CIA ad. It's not like, oh, wokeness has... I mean, in a roundabout way, it is wokeness has infiltrated the government because most people are woke. Most people don't hate gay people with a burning passion like Tim Pool does. Most people do not want to do the ethno-state bullshit like cultural cohesion, cultural Marxism talking point shtick.
Population. I am not saying that there is a depopulation agenda. I'm saying if you are woke, you are more likely.
Yeah, okay. When he says depopulation agenda, by the way, this is a like many layered. He thinks he's being coy, but this is just great replacement theory.
Likely to be for abortion. You are more likely to be for practices that will result in the sterilization of children. Ultimately, what we're seeing now is that conservatives are more likely to have children, and left.
Also, what he's talking about here is that like people that support the right to get an abortion are also likely to support trans rights, and like he always phrases that as things that will sterilize children, because the Tim Pool types are always very weirdly concerned with the fertility and sexual capabilities of kids that are underage.
Leftists are substantially less likely to have children.
Very normal behavior.
The further you go left, the lower the chance of having kids will be. Now, the right is concerned that indoctrination in schools will help leftists
I think that's true,
overcome this shortfall generationally. That mathematically does not align. What we are seeing now in the polling, Gen Z males, of Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, and boomers, Gen Z males are the least likely generation to identify as...
God, it's weird. It's weird when he says males, too. Fucking... You can tell he basically just views humans as chattel that are, like, inferior to him or whatever. What a weirdo. I am stuck as fuck. I didn't get a box, also. That's concerning. Alright.
As feminists.
Continue.
Yeah.
So, clearly, indoctrination in schools does not work. However, of the people who do align with modern versions of American Marxism or communism, which includes wokeness, they're not going to reproduce. The long-term end here is going to be communism loses.
What I would say, though, is that I think there is a depopulation agenda. It does come from the oligarchical ruling class, the Club of Rome, the Rockefellers. These is the capitalist class, and I think you're getting it backwards. These people who call themselves Marxism in the West, tracing their origins to the CIA-funded compatible left, they're just trying to give some inauthentic ideological legitimation to an already existing agenda.
This is horseshoe theory, by the way, what Haas is doing. He's like, no, I agree with you. Jews do control the world or whatever. I mean, I'm making quite a few leaps in order to say that. But like, basically, it'll mostly come back to the anti-Semitism eventually if you press people hard enough. But like, this is sort of Haas being like, oh no, yeah, I agree with all the like anti-woke, fascist, anti-trans talking points and whatever. I just want there to be like, I just want the state to be painted red, and I want there to be like a red flag and state ownership of things and stuff. Which again, not very communist, gotta say. This track sucks. I'm gonna say it. And if you like this track, then you have shit taste. Dodge me.
And the agenda doesn't originate in Marxist ideology. The ideology is just being used to legitimate the already existing agenda, and the agenda is obvious. Monopoly capital wants to stifle the growth
my
of
jump
human
didn't come
beings,
out again. Did you see that?
civilization, and other entrepreneurs in order to maintain its hold on rents, in order to maintain its power, right? So I think that's easy to explain actually from a Marxist lens. And so what I disagree with when we say that wokeism is similar to Marxism, where there's some kind of...
It is Marxism. It's not similar.
I completely...
Well, it's cultural Marxism. There's economic and there's cultural.
Well, I completely disagree because...
Yeah, okay, so they're just agreeing and, like, preaching to the choir about Great Replacement theory and the Jewish question.
Because while in academia, there was an exploration of Marxist ideas in the 50s through the 70s, and then ran out of favor and was replaced by the kind of postmodern Foucault and so on, who were actually more influenced by people like Nietzsche and these, not really Marx, right? Marx is considered, by the way, Marx.
Well, to be clear, everybody's influenced by Marx. There's a saying that I've seen only grows more true with time. All the social sciences is just one long dialogue with the ghost of Marx, right? Like you only need to go like one or two. It's like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, but even fewer. Like you don't have to go very many layers deep to see like, oh, and this person was influenced by Marx. Even if they're like vehemently anti-Marx in their writings and whatever, if they're like the opposite of what a Marxist would say, that means that they've read Marx and that had a profound influence on shaping their opinions, if only to define them in opposition to Marx. So even the postmodernist thinkers are very heavily influenced by Karl Marx, because he's basically he might be in some ways like the godfather of all modern social sciences. It's very weird to say, but like he wasn't right on everything, but I think there are so many issues that he offered a comprehensive and more measured commentary on that a lot of people weren't at the time. It's a matter of circumstance, but you know,
it's like orthodox in a sense. He's outdated. He's patriarchal. He's Eurocentric. He's cis hetero patriarchal, whatever. He himself is just critiqued in academia. But the connection to Marxism only is this very vague, very ambiguous kind of commitment to freedom and
well, it's are you familiar with the origin of critical race theory?
Yes, but this was as a critical race theory. Not many people know this. Began as a rejection of Marxism, which elevated the class struggle as the principal.
No, that's incorrect. Kimberly.
Critical race theory has its origins in just plain old critical theory, and critical theory is very Marxist in its origins. That's not to say it is entirely Marxist, but you know, like I said, with basically everything in the social sciences, it is influenced by the writings of Marx. And to give like a brief explanation, because I know they're not gonna talk about it or like give an adequate explanation here. Critical theory, I think is a framework that states that like certain... You know what? Maybe I'm not even going to comment on it, because you have to be a fucking scholar in the subject to know what like critical theory and critical race theory are. It's a very complicated framework that describes very complicated ways in which systems of power and oppression interact with each other, and that it is influenced by like the material dialectic of the world that we're living in, such as the influence that Marx had on it. You know. Oh wow, I hit that guy? Interesting.
Kimberly Crenshaw wrote specifically, she specifically wrote in the book Critical Race Theory that Marx was right, and he didn't, but what he missed from the American context was that racial politics played a major role in oppressor versus oppression. Whereas Marx's view was economic. She said you can't deny the race-based component in the United States. Therefore, building off of Marx's critical theory, we must add the component of race to it.
Yeah, but making oppressor and oppressed the fundamental basis is not Marxist. That comes from the legacy of radical liberalism. Marxism is about understanding objective historical laws and social contradictions, which is not reducible to some simplistic oppressor-oppressed. That's liberalism, because liberalism was primarily focused on getting rid of explicit political structures. Marxism is more focused on understanding how the development of the mode of production and the relations of production actually condition the political superstructure.
Yeah, see,
this is a very complex debate and continues to this day, and part of the long dialogue with the Ghost of Marx. I don't know who I agree with more here, because you could make an argument for both. I don't think either of them is genuine, but the dialectic of oppressor and oppressed that eventually resolves itself in synthesis to create a new dialectic, the advancement of that is a very Marxian thing. And a lot of liberal thinkers have sort of picked up on that over time, much to their chagrin and teeth gritting, because a lot of liberals are idealists in the philosophical sense. But at the same time, like, Marx didn't comment that much on explicitly racial politics. He much more focused on class lines. So the application of that dialectic to race, or the attempts to like incorporate racial politics into that dialectic in some way, are not necessarily from Marx himself, but could be Marxist as well, or they could be liberal. A lot of liberals will try to invoke racial politics and social politics, identity politics, as a refutation of the class dialectic, which I don't think is the case. But all that to say, I think there's a point to both of these, and like, it's hard to say definitively.
This is the thing. People think of Marxism in purely economic terms, and that was the basis of it. But Marxism has changed a lot. The Marxist movement, and I talk about the communist movement. The communist movement is transgenderism. The communist movement is Black Lives Matter, because it's a destructive movement in the West that wants to break down the social structures to replace it with their social structures. You look at critical race theory. Was absolutely invented by Communist Party members.
Structures.
The concept of white privilege was invented by Ted Allen and Noel Ignatieff, two members of the Communist Party USA.
Okay, so what he's talking about here, like, initially he did say some correct things about like, yes, the aims of a social movement that's like influenced by Marx and stuff. The aims of a movement like that is definitely, at least part of it, is to destroy existing social structures because they are harmful and oppressive, and then replacing them with more egalitarian social structures. But he's phrasing it as this like weird fear-mongery thing. I need to unpause to see what else he was saying.
Communist Party member.
Oh, yeah. And then he said something incredibly stupid. Peach Edvis Pog, welcome to chat. There's no command for friend code. I'll have to give it to you later. But when this guy, when he says that white privilege was invented by these two Communist Party members, he's full of shit. White privilege is just a term that refers to the phenomenon that already existed, whereby people who are white have certain benefits of the doubt given to them that people who are not white don't get. White privilege is like, in some ways it's difficult to pin down, but a very visible example would be interactions with the police, right? Police see white people more often than not as people, but they see black people as like criminals in the making or whatever, right? There's a lot more dehumanization of non-white people in the police than there is of white people, and that is a form of white privilege. That's not me saying that like, oh, because you're white you have so much privilege. No, it's like, I feel like a lot, for the most part, white privilege means that like white people are treated as people, which they should be. The problem is that minorities aren't. Around this turn, and I will. I've been driving great this time. Oh well, you have on
All
days, you
the
have
radical
off
gay
days.
movements in this country now are
whatever.
controlled by Marxists.
But
I'll give you an example.
But
One
it sounds,
nation.
but it sounds like what you're saying is that
Sick.
communists are using these things to destroy the system. This is not
Absolutely.
representative of what they actually want in the end.
No, to replace the system, to
Right.
transform the system.
From
like
the ashes
Obama
of the
said,
old, we shall
you
build a new.
have to destroy the existing social structures.
Right,
That
right.
is, that is why the Chinese.
What I'm trying to clarify here is,
I mean, in order to get the Marxist synthesis, you do have to obliterate the existing thesis and antithesis, right? So, like, as an example, the lords and serfs were the thesis and antithesis of the feudal age. Through various revolutions, reform movements, and whatnot, that dialectic was obliterated in most countries and replaced with the synthesis from that, which was the capitalist class, and then an antithesis formed to that, which was the proletariat. You had the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. This is the new thesis and antithesis, which will eventually obliterate into a new synthesis. That cycle continues on and on and on. And it requires that the existing system be destroyed or massively changed in order to do so, because you're fundamentally changing the relation people have to the productive forces in their lives. You know, the relation that somebody has to the mill that they work at, or the school that they teach at, or the house that they live in, you know?
what Haas is describing is, here's a system we want to make. What you're describing is, here's how communists are destroying the current system.
Exactly, because
Yeah. And I mean, yes, we do want to destroy the current system, because it's a very flawed and in many ways harmful system, and we have a better idea.
they
for how to
may
run the
say
world.
their goal is this class, this society. It will never get to that. Once power is centralized in a few hands, it only ever stays in a few hands.
I agree.
Communism is not about redistributing wealth or a social change. It's
No, it is. It is. What he's describing is a very real tendency, even in communist movements, that there's like a lot of authoritarian tendencies. But communism and socialism, the ideologies, are about the redistribution of wealth and the democratization of many things. So was capitalism, by the way. When that was the new revolutionary ideology, capitalism was all about redistributionist politics and democratizing the world. There were just unforeseeable, or sometimes very foreseeable, flaws that led to the late stage capitalism that we know now. God damn it.
about concentrating all wealth and all power in a very, very.
Let me
few hands.
give you an example. So during Occupy Wall Street, in the early days, it was eclectic. There were conservatives, libertarians, leftists, liberals, socialists, communists. Some of the principal organizers who eventually took over the movement, pushed everyone else out, centralized all the power within themselves, told me that our goal is to flip the pyramid.
Yeah.
And I said, okay. Now the average person might take that to mean the bourgeois ultra elites get put on the bottom and the working class is on top.
Or the homeless.
But that's not true.
Yeah.
What actually happens if you flip a pyramid over? The bricks crumble into a pile of bricks with someone from the bottom now on top. And they said, exactly. They said, we hope that when we flip the system, it puts us in the central elite authority positions where we can run the system properly.
Okay, so what Tim is describing right now is an opportunist within the like a potentially ostensibly left movement. This is a real tendency. He's invoking it disingenuously here, of course, to make it seem like this is all leftism is and all leftists are like this or whatever. But, you know, authoritarian tendencies are definitely something that you have to guard against. And the real aims of leftists, of socialists, of communists in this country, in many countries, is not to invert the pyramid, it is to destroy it and instead build like a cube where there's not really any hierarchy that's discernible, right? That's the real objective here. What he's describing, I think, was the case in 1984, and it was the case certainly in Stalinist Russia that things like that happened, where opportunists would just turn it into a different version of the same system
properly.
But I don't see what's specifically Marxist. This is just liberalism. If you look at the history,
this classic
let me
Marxism.
continue. The classical liberalism was precisely about this kind of rebellion against the existing authority and structure. Vaguely speaking, there's nothing specifically Marxist about that. Obviously, Marxism is revolutionary, but it's not based.
I think so far Haas is actually correct here. This is what the capitalists did, by the way. What Tim described with like, oh, socialists just want to put themselves on top. No, that's in fact what the merchants did, the capitalists in the medieval Europe. They wanted to destroy the feudal order based, but they wanted to create a new order with themselves on top rather than the nobles. And of course, instead of that happening, what actually ended up happening was that a lot of the noble families and merchant families married into each other. So in some cases, there didn't even need to be a revolution in the first place. And then the serfs and the peasants became the proletariat. George Orwell describes this as well, where like the bottom class tends to remain as the bottom class throughout time. And there's an ongoing struggle of trying to change that.
Based in this kind of simplistic, we want to put the people on the bottom on the top. I'll give you an example of this. There's also something I want to speak to with regarding the communist infiltration. But, Marxism doesn't say the poorest members of society are the revolutionary class. The poorest members of society are the lumpen. If you understand, the term lumpen proletariat, the criminals, the vagabonds, homeless, drug dealers, addicts, and so on and so on. That's the lowest. The working class is actually not necessarily the poorest part of society.
No,
So
aren't they the bourgeois?
Who?
It was the middle class, weren't they?
No. The bourgeois is not defined by its wealth. It's not necessarily defined by its social status. It's defined by its relationship to the mode of production. So it's a very important distinction to understand. Marxism is not flipping the pyramid. Marxism is about understanding a class struggle already existing before Marxism. Now, I want to speak to what you mentioned about communist infiltration, so-called. Look,
so far, everything that Haas said there is correct about Marxism and about what Marx had to say about like communism and stuff. That it's possible to like the wealth by itself isn't what determines like your class, as it were, in a capitalist system. It's how you relate to the productive stuff.
The extent that there's the communists or the transgender movement and BLM, I can personally attest that is only to the extent that they have compromised with the ruling class. I'll give you an example. Gorbachev was not a hardline communist. He was a liberal who was trying to reform the communist system. All of these people you mentioned are not communists. They're ex-communists. They're former communists. They're communists who were traitors who compromised with liberalism. And that is actually with precedent. Lenin is someone who arose in distinction because he recognized the treachery of the Social Democrats who sold out to the system.
Okay, so, well, that's true. The Social Democrats in the 19th and early 20th century did sell out pretty hard. They killed a lot of Social Democrats in the early 20th century were almost as harmful to the socialist movement as fascists were, funnily enough. But it is also correct that what he's saying about like just rebelling against the system, like that is mostly like just on its own. That's not necessarily like a Marxian thing or a Marxist thing.
And the same thing happened with Gorbachev. The same thing happened with the CPUSA, Angela Davis, the Committees for Correspondence, which wanted to overthrow the hardline communists and have a Gorbachev-style liberal democratic reform. So these people you mentioned are just the traitors who sold out to the ruling class.
By the way, I should mention that, like, again, he's talking about, like, Soviet Union and stuff, which weren't socialists.
These are key communists. Look, you got Michael Kinchner out in Phoenix Democratic Socialists of America now, who boasts how he got inside the Boy Scouts and changed the...
Democratic Socialists of America is a mostly, I mean, some of them are socialists. It's such a decentralized org, it's hard to say whether or not they're liberal or socialist, but a lot of common thread, especially with the org in DC, is that they're ineffectual as all fuck.
The policy, he did this inside the Boy Scouts to change their policy from no homosexuals allowed to admitting homosexuals.
Okay. I just want to clarify too, I was correct about bourgeoisie.
That destroyed the Boy
I
Scouts.
was correct about my statement on bourgeoisie. I just
What do you mean?
fact checked myself. It refers to the business owners in the middle class. So
No. The bourgeoisie does not refer to the middle class. The bourgeoisie would have been the middle class 600 years ago. Nowadays, the bourgeoisie refers to the owner class. Some of those people might be like have enough, like not have a ton of wealth, and maybe they would be quote unquote middle income by like a U.S. tax bracket standard or whatever. But the middle class, in terms of their relationship to production and whatnot, is not the bourgeoisie. They are the upper class. In fact, they are the ruling class. Like Haas said, it doesn't matter. The issue here is not wealth on its own. It's your relationship to, do you own a business or do you work at that business that you don't own and you get like a salary or whatever. So far, so good.
Somewhere between the lowest and highest income.
It's a technical
reference
term.
to urban charters and the merchant class.
Right, but in Marxism, bourgeoisie refers to a specific relation of production. Sociologically, it may vaguely refer to...
Also, nobody uses the word bourgeoisie to mean the middle class. No, like nobody. Maybe in some French-speaking context, because it's a French word, because it means like the burghers, the people that live in cities and stuff. But when somebody says the bourgeoisie, 0% chance that they're referring to a middle class. They are always referring to like the property owners, like people who have, anywhere from small business owners to big giant like investment portfolios and whatever. These people are the ruling class. Oh boy, Bouchon. Ow. Talk shit, get hit, I guess. Let's keep going.
all these other things middle class. But from the Marxist standpoint, the bourgeoisie is those who, the capitalists who own the means of production through private property.
Right.
Okay.
But my point is, it does not mean the ultra-wealthy oligarchic elites. It means the guy who owns the mom-and-pop pizza shop.
No.
Yes, it does.
Well,
no.
here's the thing.
It means both.
Because it really
of those.
originated in France, relating to urban charters for people who owned businesses.
The bourgeoisie started out small, yes, but what it has concretely evolved into is what Lenin would describe a imperialist bourgeoisie or a monopoly bourgeoisie. And Lenin actually doesn't identify. He makes a distinction. He says there is a petty bourgeoisie, which can be an ally of the proletarian movement, and actually should be an ally of them because they have an interest in overthrowing the ruling bourgeoisie.
I'm going to tell you the issue I take.
Yeah.
The issue I take is I use a general academic term for a certain class. You deny the definition, and then when I say here's at least generally, you said, okay, well Marx says something different about it.
No, Tim Pool's being disingenuous here. He's getting hung up on like an antiquated definition of the word bourgeoisie. I've never heard anybody use bourgeoisie to mean like, oh, it's the middle class or whatever. That was true, like I said, 500, 600 years ago. That is not true in the year 2023. And in fact, it hasn't been true for 600 years. So nobody uses the word like that anymore. I don't know why that definition is actually still in like the dictionary. Maybe it's a conspiracy. No, it's probably just somebody like a historian or whatever. But yeah, Haas is basically making the argument that I just said, that bourgeoisie means you are part of the class that owns the means of production, which means you're the ruling class in a capitalist.
Look, are we talking about the same thing, or
So I want to just be clear about what I think. I don't think people who own mom and pop shops are part of the same class as the oligarchical elites.
This is the issue I take with modern leftism, and even what's happening now is
This is why the left is stupid. I don't know if I even necessarily agree with Haas on that one. I think that people who own a small mom and pop shop still would technically classify as a member of the bourgeoisie. However, I think they would be like petit bourgeoisie, the petty bourgeois. You know, Haas just explained this in reference to Lenin. which is that the small mom and pop shops are a little bit less distilled in their interests than like giant businesses and whatever. And they're a little bit closer to a democratic form of business ownership than something like Walmart, for example, would be. You know? Like a small workers cooperative that is run by the workers would not be bourgeoisie or proletariat. It would be actually a synthesis of the two, where you would have worker owners.
Racism means something different. Bourgeoisie means something different. It means whatever we need it to mean for our political ends.
It means what the book says if you read
No,
the
it doesn't mean what the book says. It means
Okay.
a word represents an idea that we can use to communicate.
If you want to pull up
certain
the great
issues. So if-
Soviet encyclopedia on the petty bourgeoisie,
Right, so
even
if
Wikipedia
I say a
will
word
show
and then you say, my book says this word means something different,
Yeah, but yeah, like Haas is correct here. Tim's arguing against Wikipedia on this one, and like the existing body of knowledge and modern language in general. Fuck, man, I'm driving so bad today.
this is the obfuscation of words for the purpose of winning a political debate.
Hold on,
Yeah.
let's just clarify what we mean. I don't mean...
That's why I asked, does the bourgeoisie represent? And you said, no, it doesn't. But what you're doing is you're taking a different, altered definition of a word to change what our argument actually
But the
is.
bourgeoisie does not mean this for Marxists. It has never just meant that for Marxists, and it also doesn't just mean this for the purposes of what I'm trying to say.
And this is what the modern left does in the United States with racism and class.
But
they say our word means something different. You misunderstood us.
Hold on. You're trying to say that because I reject the view that the bourgeoisie concretely that we're talking about is the mom and pop shop,
I'm saying
this means I'm obfuscating words.
When I said,
call it whatever you want.
You could have said that actually is the traditional academic view of bourgeoisie in Marxism. However, instead you said, no, you're wrong.
Okay, so you're upset that words can mean different things in different contexts.
No, I'm upset that the left typically changes the definition of words to suit their political ends.
I think anyone who just...
Dude, Tim's getting so mad because he knows he's wrong. Like, this is one thing that Tim really struggles with, because he's a right-wing grifter. He usually has to keep a cool head, even in the face of, like, ordinarily frustrating circumstances. But when he's losing, he gets so frustrated. Because, yeah, like, you know... Does every single academic agree on the definition of, what the fuck is happening with my internet right now? I feel like somebody just, like, unplugged the router or something. Okay, I think I'm back. I dropped a ton of frames and my internet... Yeah, okay. Yeah, no. In some niche academic circles, bourgeoisie does not mean just the owning class, but in any common definition, like the most common definition and the most commonly referred to academic definition is like the owning class. And, you know, Wikipedia would agree with you on, or would agree with me on that.
Uses words in different contexts, which everyone, regardless of their political alignment, does. I just think this is just an unfair kind of characterization of what I'm trying to say.
Look, the typical...
And of course, it's a pretty common indication of somebody losing a political debate when they decide to start playing word games, when they start saying that, oh, your definition of this word is wrong.
Yeah, the thing is racism here. To most Americans, racism means...
Because this is like, they're trying to disengage from the subject. They're trying to pivot the topic. You know, now the game is trying to keep them on topic.
A certain segment of society strikes about the power structure. So it means that a certain segment of society, usually racially based, oppresses another segment of society. Okay. So you can get a black football player on $40 million a year who is oppressed and is suffering racism by some white guy on food stamps. Racism...
What is bro waffling about? What? What? Okay, no, wait. Okay, I think I realized what he just said. He's making the stupid fucking... Oh, if white privilege is real, then why is a black guy making 40 million on a football team in a better position than a white guy who has no job and has food stamps? Checkmate, liberal. Just complete disengagement from the subject matter, like, on all levels. The real, like, thing about white privilege is that, you know, a proper form of this analogy would be if you had a black football player making 40 million and a white football player making 40 million, the white guy's life would be better. you know, by virtue of the color of his skin and all of the social and historical context that goes along with that. And then, of course, if you want to take it the other way, then like a black guy on food stamps versus a white guy on food stamps, like whose life would be more down in the dumps? It would probably be the black guy, because there's like a system of racial preference that prefers white people and the aesthetic of being white, being more white than somebody. Like we even see this in professional environments where like people have to code switch. People want in a professional environment, people want white sounding voices. And so sometimes black people will have to code switch to make their voice sound less black. Which is a form of like white supremacy, and that's a form of white privilege that white people enjoy, is that we just have white voice by default. And of course the answer to that is like black people shouldn't have to code switch. That social norm or that professional norm shouldn't exist. But again, like I said, these guys aren't interested in that. They don't actually want to engage with the subject matter at hand, because this guy is a I mean, it would probably only take a couple questions about like the Civil Rights Act to reveal the depth of this guy's racism, you know?
Means something totally different to a Marxist than it does to most of us. Democracy means something totally different. And as to your point about infiltration, I'm going to do some promotion here, because I write books about Marxists in government. I say in these books, Security Risk Senators, I profile 30 currently serving US senators who are involved with Communist Party USA, Democratic Socialists of America, Iran.
Bro's doing 1950s ass McCarthyism. Oh boy, the communists are in government. Like, damn, dude, that's crazy. Actually driving kind of well for once.
China, Cuba,
we now ruined
North Korea.
The debate.
Yeah, Patty Murray out of Washington State,
and
deeply involved with the Communist Party USA for decades.
And how powerful is this person, you're saying?
Well, she's one of the third-ranked Democrat in the Senate.
And you're saying that she is currently in the Communist Party USA?
No, I didn't. I said she has worked with the Communist Party USA for decades.
On what?
On social policy in Washington State. She has she has funded their organization. She's steered state funding to their organization.
And she's funded them to create a working class popular movement, or funded them to
create
do what?
to get money to take over institutions.
Like which institutions do the communists control?
In Washington State.
Right, which ones?
They control most of the labor unions in Washington State.
Which labor union in Washington State is controlled by the Communist Party?
By the Communist Movement, SEIU.
So you're changing the definition of words. Instead of the Communist Party, it's the Communist Movement. What does communist refer to concretely?
Let me finish.
That's true. These guys are really slimy. They'll do that thing where like, oh, this has been infiltrated by the communists, and it's like, okay, well. And then Haas is pressing them. I was like, well, what do you mean? The Communist Party? And he's like, yeah, the politicians have been working with the Communist Party. He's like, are they Communist Party members? It's like, no, but they've been working with them. Like, okay. Like, on what? On social policy. Like, what? Where? In this state, and blah, blah, blah. And now it gets to, this is the most granular level of it. It's like, now the goalpost has shifted from the communists have infiltrated our government to there are communists in this one labor union in Washington State. Which, yeah, it's a fucking labor union. There's going to be all sorts of people involved in a labor union, you know?
She is deeply involved with the Communist Party.
How?
But also because
define deeply.
They worked in her campaigns. She funneled money to
How is that
causes.
Deeply? That's what do you mean? What do you mean by work? Did someone pass out?
Dude, communists work on fucking every campaign. Like, look, if you want to go this way, then you could argue just by virtue of like one kid who's a Nazi, volunteering on a congressional campaign, that means the Nazis have infiltrated the government and whatever. There are real arguments that you could make about fascist tendencies becoming more and more present in the GOP platform, and I would argue that the GOP is a fascist party, but basing that argument on the presence of like a couple people in a campaign or like doing volunteer work, no, absolutely not.
Leaflets in the Communist Party. The Communist Party is irrelevant.
Bro, your counter to my criticism.
Also, that's unfortunately correct. The Communist Party is pretty irrelevant in America.
of you changing a definition.
I'm just applying your criticism.
No, you're
to
literally
you.
not. You're arguing semantics of the word work and deeply.
No, he's yeah, and both Tim Pool and Haas are correct here. He is doing the exact same thing to them that they did to him, which is haggle over definitions. But in his case, he's trying to pin them down on them having moved the goalposts a bunch, whereas in their case, they just like willfully being oblique to the definition of the bourgeoisie and shit like that. Miss my mini turbo.
When I asked you to define bourgeois, and you gave me a Marxist alternate definition of it.
Tim, to be clear, okay,
that's just the definition of it.
Okay, I'm a good Maoist. I will do the struggle session and the self-criticism myself. I repent for refusing to draw equivalence between the meaning of the bourgeoisie as it applies to France in the 1600s and the bourgeoisie today.
Bro, by regular people to convey an idea, and you arguing the definition was wrong for the sake of your ideology.
So by the bourgeois. Okay, let's talk about ordinary people. Technically speaking, bougie. The word bougie is used in like hip hop culture to refer to like the ultra rich. It's not used to refer to ma and pa shop. So actually, you're changing the definition to mean something scholastic
and say bougie.
Yeah.
Bourgeoisie academically has a meaning that is what people are trying to convey an idea to make an argument.
No, academically speaking, that's the technicality. If you want to be an academic, you have to consult the literature, and the literature states that the bourgeoisie, typically speaking, is referring to the hegemonic or big bourgeoisie. The petty bourgeoisie is a different classification. It's not synonymous. Now, you can say I'm changing the definition of words. Please, I implore you, read elementary Marxist literature, even the Communist Manifesto. It's only 7,000 words. It's literally in there. It doesn't equate the capitalist class with the petty bourgeoisie. The point I'm making is,
you read a book from Marx and determined his interpretation of the word is now the universal interpretation.
So where did the academic community get it from?
It's a French word.
Okay,
what did the 17th century?
So you're saying the academic community in the contemporary context refers to the bourgeoisie as the 1700s French burger class?
Like when we're conveying a general idea and we seek to look up a definition to better understand it and we read a general view of it, it has a meaning. Okay. So what we often see in the United States from the left is, as Trevor pointed out, with the word like racism.
Dude, Tim is such on the back foot here, and like Haas, like. I think this is where it probably becomes evident that Haas is pretty well read on the subject. He has read Marx for sure. Like the like I said earlier, the definition of the bourgeoisie, if you're using it to refer to the middle class, that's something that hasn't applied for literal centuries. Like you wouldn't be able to find, like you would have to go so many layers deep to find somebody saying that, referring to a currently existing class of people. Like there have been people in academia, like you want to find an example of people referring to the bourgeoisie as the middle class. Sure, they're going to be talking about 1600s France. You know, they're not going to be talking about 21st century America.
They redefine the parameters based on their specific academic view.
Also, get owned, Tim. The definitions of words change over time, and we no longer speak like we did in the fucking 17th century.
Outside the confines.
But he's redefining the word communist to mean anyone who has any tangential association whatsoever.
He said she's worked with the Communist Party. He said how? She's funded the communist movement. That is a one-to-one correlation.
Okay. Funded the communist movement. I wonder. This is unintentionally pretty revealing, I think, on Tim's part, because on the left, movements are pretty fragmented. They're not super centralized, and the more movements try to centralized around one figure of leadership and authority and whatever, the less effective they become, actually. Like, the BLM org hasn't done jack shit. In fact, they're like a net detriment to the advancement of racial politic in the United States. But at the, and like all the success that orgs on the left get is typically from more regional and local activism and stuff. But what Tim is projecting here is that the right wing does operate like that. The right wing talking points are basically the same throughout the whole country and throughout the whole world. You know, like you could read like 30 Wikipedia articles on leftism in the United States and still have only gone through the past like 100 years, right? Whereas fascism in the United States is one wiki article. You know? Well, I did it.
Okay. What is a communist movement without the party? What is that
Well,
referred
it's
to?
Democratic Socialist America. It's Liberation
The
Road. It's
Democratic.
Freedom Road Socialist Organization.
Do you know who founded the Democratic Socialist
Michael
America?
Harrington.
So why didn't he call it a communist party?
Because he wanted to infiltrate the Democratic
So
Party.
Michael Harrington was being insincere when he talked about his denunciation of Marxism, Leninism, and communism. Is that what you're saying? What's your
100%.
evidence for that? What's your
Well,
evidence
because
for the
he then
insincerity?
he hooked up with the New American movement, which came out of the Communist Party USA,
Which
and
came out of
SDS.
it. So these are people who splintered out of it
but
and
they were
rejected
still Marxist-Leninists. Right now,
Based-
you've
based
got
on what
Democratic
evidence?
Socialist. Because they explicitly state it. I've got huge documents.
They
Democratic
stated it in
Socialist
the
America
past, or they state it today?
right now.
So
They have-
the DSA is officially a Marxist-Leninist party.
it is a Marxist
Wait, are you saying-
organization.
He's having to jump through so many hoops for this one.
I've got
Okay,
docu-
DSA is officially rejects Marxism, Leninism
Absolutely.
as authoritarian.
Absolutely untrue.
The whole point of
100%
democratic
untrue.
socialism, the whole point of democratic socialism
is to
was,
fool people into
was to
accepting communism.
compromise with the liberal hegemony.
No,
Because they were
it was
saying,
to take.
Yes, as much as, you know, Haas has a way bigger disdain and distaste for liberals than I do because he's a fascist ultimately. But he is correct that like that's the reason for the Democratic Socialist Party existing and for it calling itself the Democratic Socialist Party, like Democratic Socialist, because they want to pursue the avenue, or at least they did want to pursue the avenue of compromising with liberals and coalition building with liberals. Now, in some respects, they have gone too far in that respect to the point that they're now basically just a left liberal party that is somewhat to the left of the Democrats and less politically effective, if that's even possible. But like Trevor Loudon is so full of shit, it like kind of hurts to listen to here.
Take over the liberal. They explicitly stated they got there to infiltrate the Democratic Party. Democratic Socialists of America gave us Obamacare. This is the central secret of.
No, they didn't.
Came through
What's the
Quentin.
evidence? What's the
I can
evidence?
talk. I've written whole books on this.
okay,
Oh, bro, source, dude, trust me, I wrote a book about it. Fucking genius. Dude, you know what this reminds me of? This reminds me of, okay, in philosophy class in college, I took an intro philosophy class. It was pretty good. About like Einstein and Descartes and Locke and Newton and like all these different philosophical figures. And one of them was Ayn Rand. I had to read a philosophical essay by Ayn Rand. Biden card, thank you for the follow. And Ayn Rand had the audacity in her philosophical writings to cite Atlas Shrugged, which not only was authored by her, but is also not an academic text. It's a fucking novel. And Ayn Rand, like, cited that academically in one of her essays. It was like, yeah, this is a serious piece of philosophical writing. And this guy's doing the exact same thing and thinks he's not a giant dumbass for it.
I can get look. It came through Quentin Young, who was a Communist Party member, who then became a Democratic Socialist
Became a
American
traitor.
member,
Was.
and was Obama's personal physician.
I think-
and claims. Let me
Damn, that's
finish.
crazy.
Let me finish.
Also, I will refer back to another thing I said in the previous stream is that a lot of the guys that this Trevor Loudon is name dropping here are probably Jewish, and that might be why he knows their names. I'd be willing to bet like half or more are Jewish, and the reason he knows their names is because they're Jewish, and he's like name dropping them because it fuels his hatred for the Jews.
Virtually open borders came through the communist movement. That is a Communist Party and Democratic Socialist America construct which has been used to destroy America. The push for the Iran nuclear deal came from the communist movement. The central secret of communism is this. The small Communist Party takes over labor unions. The labor unions influence...
By the way, no. Already, this guy's operating on a shit premise. Wouldn't you know it, small organizations are small and thus not powerful. And then also, I don't know if this is still the case, or at least it was until very recently. It's forbidden for communists and socialists to be members of labor unions. That doesn't mean that in practice there aren't any communists and socialists in labor unions. In fact, Sean Fain, I believe, is a socialist. I don't know. He probably tries to keep that a little bit under wraps when he's appearing on TV because he needs to appeal to the American people and whatever. But there's actually a law on the books. You're not going to find anyone on CGGP Worldwide this time of day? Yeah, okay. Let's do some regular worldwides. Let's see if there's anybody online here. Also, welcome to chat, Biden Cart. Thank you. Always good to see new faces. But yeah, the wouldn't you know it, the powerful parties in the United States are the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Big shocker, I know. The Communist Party has no power in America. Okay, there we go.
And control the Democratic
So you're saying
Party.
Joe Sims of the CPUSA and Rosanna, Joe Sims and Rosanna, they're the puppet masters of the Democratic Party in America. Is that?
Yeah, I am saying that. The people.
Love Mario Kart, loves listening to people smarter than me discuss political issues. Well, thank you. I'm glad to potentially offer both of those things, political discussion and all that. Well, I don't know how smart anybody is relative to each other here. I'm definitely smarter than probably at least 2 of the 3 people on the video that I'm watching.
Around them.
Joe Sims is senile. He doesn't even.
Look, the Communist Party US. I know.
Although obviously these guys know a lot of names and faces that I don't.
Joe Sims too.
Yeah.
The Communist Party USA is led by Joe Sims, but the movement is much broader than that. You've got the Liberation
You're saying he's the
Road.
puppet master.
Well, he is part of that apparatus.
Who's the puppet master?
Well, I would say Judith LeBlanc would be right up there.
Who is that?
Judith LeBlanc. She's the one who put Deb Haaland in as Secretary of the Interior.
And what is their relation to the Communist Party?
Judith LeBlanc is a member of the Central Committee of the Communist Party.
And she herself put someone in a position of power?
Yes.
Absolutely, she did. She mounted a campaign called Deb for Interior.
Yeah.
Damn, that's crazy. It's almost like she wasn't solely responsible for this person getting into power. It's almost like it takes a concerted campaign and a lot of activism and a lot of inter-institution dialogue in order to get somebody to a governmental position of power, and it's not attributable to one person who happens to be a communist.
Yeah.
She ran it. They had Facebook pages and buses. She was. She got a whole bunch of celebrity endorsements like Alyssa Milano, Mark Ruffalo, Sarah Silverman.
Right.
They got Deb Haaland nominated as Secretary of the Interior.
So you're
that is
claiming
100% documentable.
You're saying that she originated that entire campaign.
100%.
So,
she led it.
Can you
She
name
led
a
it.
single Communist Party member who is in office right now?
I can.
He doesn't
That
have
is
an
not
answer.
the point.
No, that is the point.
That
Because
is
one of
not-
the things we've been pushing for is them to field candidates instead of
Yeah,
kissing
hey,
Democrat
no, you're
ass.
trying
and they
to
can't
you're
do
trying to
that.
dissimulate here.
No, they don't
it
even.
is-
They don't have
this
any
is-
independence. They're
Well, no, no,
subservient
no,
to the
hold on,
Democrats.
Let me finish my point.
They're subservient to the
Let me finish
Democrats.
my point.
What he's saying is quite literally, if you don't declare you're a member of something, you have nothing to do with it at all.
That's right. There's
Well, we need
there's a
proof.
communist movement. There's a few people in the communist.
Well, no, that's not what Haas is saying here. What he's saying is that, like, if this person happens to be, like, a communist and whatever, but isn't, like, acting on behalf of the Communist Party, that doesn't necessarily mean they're acting as a communist. Like, there are plenty of Democrats in the Democratic Party that might believe that they're socialists, but for all intents and purposes, they are acting as liberals. The Democratic Party is a liberal party, right? And what Haas is saying here is that, like, oh, because, you know, this one person being a member, like maybe an avowed member of the Communist Party, whatever, and having been on this campaign, doesn't then make the whole campaign communist, right? It just means that one person is. And they're a small part of that campaign, even if they're among the leadership of the campaign. Campaigns are made of a lot of people. They have a lot of stuff that they do. And wouldn't you know it, it involves coalition building, which is something that Tim Pool has never had to do because it's always been done for him by his right-wing business daddies who have a lot of money to throw around. Whereas on the left, you genuinely have to compromise with people and, like, find areas where you're willing to work towards a common short-term or intermediate objective, or even in some cases a long-term objective.
Party that direct a movement. The communist movement is why we have open borders. It's why we have Obamacare.
Dog.
It's why Iran is about to get the nuclear.
We do not have open
the
borders.
communist movement
Shut up.
controls the labor unions
I
of
only
this
wish.
country, and the labor unions control the Democratic Party.
As long as
That
we
is
change
why-
the
Again,
definition of
that-
communist
You're not
movement.
allowed
the
to be
communist movement
communist
is
in
anybody
labor
who has an
unions, not on
allegiance
paper
to the
anyways.
communist movement. Some are party members, some are not. Some are Democrats, like Chris Murphy, the senator from Connecticut.
This guy, okay. I feel like this guy's just going around in circles. This guy probably sees communism under every unturned rock that he walks past. This is like borderline non-falsifiable, the degree to which he's arguing that everything is communist. It's like, I mean, really, I can only compare it to the Jewish question, because it doesn't matter how much evidence you're presented with XYZ group being out of power. For him, it's like a fundamental truth of the world that this insidious group that we call the communists are in control of everything. And, you know, like, whatever else.
deeply in bed with the Communist Party. While he was criticizing Trump for Russia, he had a Communist Party member as one of his key staff members. While he was Chris Murphy, the Senate.
Okay, Chris Murphy.
He was running as one of his offices.
So I think what you're doing is cherry picking cases where communists are acting as subservient to the Democrats. Because here's the thing.
Look, Obamacare.
Here's what I have practical experience
was completely a Democratic Socialist of America program.
Look, Obamacare was Romney Care. That was the right-wing conservative plan. That was not a Democratic Socialist thing. The Democratic Socialist thing would have been Medicare for all, and and single-payer healthcare, which is way more robust than Obamacare.
Look, it is now the law of the land.
He's not only arguing against phantoms, he's arguing against phantoms that live in his own closet.
In this country,
that's not true.
Not true. The fact that Deb Haaland is cancelling energy leases all over this country, directly put in place by a card-carrying open member of the Communist Party USA, which is completely documentable. I have it in my books.
Sure,
I can show you all of it.
Before we get into
Trust me, bro, it's in my book. Fucking hilarious.
The book. I think what we're actually touching upon here is the simple fact that the Communist Party USA has relinquished its role as an independent political organ of the working class and has entirely subordinated itself as an institution to the Democratic Party. So hold on, let me finish because I let you finish. It makes sense that here or there you're going to find staffers of this or that person who's actually in power, who's a member of the Communist Party. The whole role of that organization is just to serve Democrats. And I know this because it's a huge point of contention within the party.
Okay, so okay, he's about to explain how it's a point of contention in the party, but most of what he said is true, except for the whole, like, communists are subservient to the Democrats. The difference between, like, the Communist Party USA and some other leftist parties is that the Communist Party has made the choice to engage with the electoral system as it now exists, which unfortunately means having to pick between either the Republicans or the Democrats. You don't really get to pick another option there because of, like, historical inertia and a lot of other factors that lead to those being the only two viable parties at the moment. It's 100cc, I'm not realizing. Or maybe not? No, yeah, it is. But what else he said there was true, that, like, Communist Party is a bit player in this. They're not this all-powerful organ that Trevor Loudon seems to think that they are.
Party. People in the party are not happy about this, but Joe Sims and Rosanna, who are corrupt sellouts from the Committees of Correspondence era, who are reformists from the Gorbachev era, who reject orthodox Marxism-Leninism, continue to toe this line. Why? Because they're corrupt sellouts who are institutionally subordinated to powers that are higher than them. And again, this has historical precedent. Traitors to the working class movement, ex-communists, make for excellent servants of the ruling class. They did in World War I when the Social Democrats of Germany and France were at the vanguard of promoting the First Imperialist War. And that's exactly what Lenin was standing out opposed to and against.
Yeah,
so you're completely wrong. All you're proving is that there's a whole lot of people who were communists at one point became shit.
So, okay, what he's saying, I don't agree with Lenin. I don't agree with Haas on a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff that I disagree with him on. But it is absolutely the case that, like, if you take a look at the social democratic parties from back in the early 20th century, this was a major point of contention in the socialist movement. They definitely, like, abandoned their socialist principles and started pursuing more, like, liberal nationalist oriented politics. In fact, that's part of how the Nazi party came to be. Rosa Luxemburg describes this weird social democrat to ultra-nationalist pipeline that comes through abandoning class politics, which is pretty much, what Haas is describing here.
Sellouts and traitors, which is true, I agree. They're traitors to the communist movement.
Look, when Judith LeBlanc is up there putting a Secretary of the Interior in place, when the current Secretary of Labour was put in place by two pro-Chinese communists, who is actually going out there supporting Chinese-supported strikes across the country, when our energy policy is in the toilet, where Biden, who has worked with the communists his entire career, has sold off 50% of America's oil reserves, which we need to fight a war, some of it to China. That is examples of high-level communist infiltration to the advantage of China and other enemies of America. That is what I'm talking about.
So if I understand you correctly, you're trying to say that the communists, who don't own any of the means of production, unlike the oligarchical capitalist class, who don't even hold any position of office and have no actual power of their own, they're the ones in power, not the actual oligarchical elite, not BlackRock. So the people who own our land and our resources, those aren't the ones in power. Joe Sims is.
How about we clarify? Let's clarify. The point is, you don't need to say I'm a communist to be a communist.
Okay, so, but where's the proof that the people who owned our land, resources, and means of production, which is the fundamental foundation of power, when you use common sense, if you own how we feed ourselves and clothe ourselves and live, you have more power than anyone else. So where's the proof that they are communists?
It is when they control the levers of power. And right now, the energy
power is downstream from money.
What do
you need money to finance a campaign. Where do you get the money?
Power comes from the barrel of a gun.
Okay, what
let me finish.
Who makes the gun?
You have got people. The communist movement in this country.
By the way, again, this guy sees communists under like every rock that he walks past. It like, you know, there is no proof of like all the owning class and whatever being communist, because they're not. They're the owning class and they're acting in their own interest, which makes them capitalist. But for him, unless it's explicitly proven that you're not a communist, then you're a communist. It's like a weird mirroring of a lot of the like woke scoldy stuff that some leftists do, where they're like, unless you prove to me that you are 100% woke, socialist, lib, communist, whatever, then you're literally Hitler too. I've always said this. But with this guy, he's doing the opposite, where it's like he sees communists in every person he doesn't know or whatever, and it's like only if you prove that you couldn't possibly be a communist, then he'll believe that you're not. But again, he's
controls the labor movement.
I asked you for proof. You have none.
I have a huge amount of proof.
Name one communist who controls one given labor.
I have a huge amount of proof. It's in my book. You should read it. You should buy it and read it. And believe me when I wrote the words in my book where I probably didn't cite any sources.
Playing a semantic game again. Look, if his point is...
Democratic Socialists of America, a communist group, took over the AFL-CIO.
They're not a communist group. Believe me, I wish that were true. The Democratic Socialists of America are not communists. They are, at the best of times, socialists. And at the worst of times, mostly just liberals. I didn't mean to hit that button. Wrong button again. I need to stop doing that. All right.
It's the labor movement.
Look, if his point is...
They cooked out all the old guard. And here's a good example. The AFL-CIO used to be opposed to illegal immigration. Used to be. When the Marxists took over under Eliseo Medina and John Sweeney, they completely reversed the policy to promoting illegal immigration to the detriment of American workers.
So as a Marxist, does it make sense that illegal immigration has its basis in the ideology of a few self-proclaimed Marxists, or have its basis in the material incentive of the capitalist class to have cheap labor? Which one?
Well, they play on that. They use the Chamber of Commerce.
So which one comes first?
The Marxists.
So you think that the material...
Marxists have used... Look,
so you think the material
stuff. It is power. It is raw power. You have a Secretary of the Interior who is closing down an energy industry because she was put in place by an agent of the CCP.
Okay, so
that is real power. You don't have to own something to control it.
Why is it that...
You had 50 mafia controlling Vegas for years.
Yeah.
You have a few hundred communists, by controlling the labor unions, can control the policy direction of the entire Democratic Party.
We have no proof
of
of that.
Okay. I have extensive proof of that. This is...
Trevor is like arguing against the concept of like, just because you don't own something doesn't mean you don't own that thing. It like I said, it's the him seeing communism everywhere is a priori. He could be given all of the evidence in the world to show that like, no, communists aren't actually in power, and he would still refuse it. You know, so I actually don't, on some level, I almost don't even think that what he said is like worth arguing against, because he's just insane. Like, he's clearly needs to seek help.
What I write my books about. They are all...
Oh my god, how did I call it? He's fucking citing his books again. Of course.
I'm just going to go out on a limb and say I don't think your books have any proof of it.
Well,
by any standard of proof.
I've been calling out these politicians for their communist ties for over 10 years.
You're accusing them of that. It's like how Antifa accuses anyone of being a fascist.
I have documentary evidence. You don't come to a foreign country and say that a large proportion of their leaders are traitors, and you do it for 10 years on multiple shows to millions of people.
What are they the leaders of? How have they promoted any communist hegemony?
Well, Obamacare, open borders.
But hold on, if you're saying Obamacare came from democratic socialism, Bernie's the one who repopularized that term, and he wanted a single-payer system.
Holy shit. Obamacare and open borders are communism? Never mind the fact that Obamacare used to be called Romneycare. I'm driving like such shit right now. This was not the track to try to do this on. Goddamn.
So
I keep forgetting that you can't get
their goal is Medicare for all. Full
so what? Scandinavian countries have that. Plenty of countries who are not communist.
New Zealand has it too, and it's a total disaster.
So every country that has universal healthcare is because of communism.
But that is a socialist construct.
Look, man, I mean, people can decide for themselves. But you saying the goal of the communists should always be to have a dramatic, hard, revolutionary implementation of policy is just not real.
I'm not saying a dramatic. That means like an uprising. I mean, have an independent party, field your own candidates, and build your own independent movement. The communists.
You're talking about overt versus subversive.
That's a tip of the iceberg.
The Communist Manifesto says the communists disdain to conceal their views.
Yeah, there's never Lenin. This is Marx.
That's true, by the way. Communists have a way harder time than everybody else hiding their power level, and if somebody was a communist, you'd be able to probably pick up on it.
Leninism. Lenin was all about conspiracy. Lenin was getting people. It's not the gaining of power that counts.
By the way, he was. I would just say it takes one to know one. Lenin was, well, he was a complicated guy, but Lenin used petty bourgeois in many instances to substitute for the Jews. At least so I've heard from his quotes from Lenin. But I don't know where he's.
It is the keeping of power.
I don't know. Lenin had to engage in secrecy because under the Tsar there was no freedom of expression or speech.
Oh, well, that's true. That is true. Under the Tsar, that's definitely didn't have that freedom. But then also Lenin was pretty opportunistic and interested in keeping power. You know what? I think I would be willing to concede about Lenin that he was a socialist, but he was bad at being socialist, right? He made a lot of mistakes, and he made a lot of bad decisions in real life that I don't think he would have made on paper. If you read some of Lenin's works outside of What Is to Be Done, they're pretty good. He's very theory brained and not very praxis brained, Lenin. Or he was.
But the communists still
it wasn't to deceive. It wasn't to deceive ordinary people.
Communism is still under the civil rights act in this country. Communism is still excluded.
Yeah,
so,
but
the
it's not enforced.
But if the argument is that Lenin was forced to conceal his views because under the Tsar wasn't allowed, at the time in the United States, when many of these people are coming in and acting subversively, they're doing it for.
But the Supreme Court has never upheld these laws.
But that's not the issue. It's not socially acceptable.
But they were fought in court, so it's
catch that. There was a little bit of great replacement theory in there, coming in and acting subversively. This is a classic talking point of fascists, not just in the United States. Like I said, fascism is basically the same everywhere. I heard this a lot in an anthropology class of mine that focused on Scandinavian countries, contemporary. A lot of the Scandinavian fascists, the Sweden Democrats, and the Danish People's Party and whatnot, which is a social democratic party turned fascist, would argue about oh, well, these refugees from Syria, this was in the heat of the refugee crisis, are coming into our country and being subversive, and they're not they're not adequately assimilating to our way of life and whatever, which is the same thing that fascists have been saying ever since fascism has existed. In fact, there were similar talking points in Germany in the 1930s and in the United States in the 1930s and in the US now, as Tim Pool is demonstrating. Don't try it, Funky Hunk. Ah, damn it.
I'm saying, if it is not socially acceptable and people don't like the term, then acting in...
Where's that in Leninism? Leninism doesn't say...
You just said...
No, Lenin says if they're going to throw you in the Siberian labor camp under the Tsars, yeah, don't break the laws, be secretive.
My point
is... there's no element of deception of ordinary people.
Yes, if the argument is there are people who are communists at heart, and they are implementing single measures moving towards communist policy, that does not negate the fact that they are communists. You're arguing that a communist would have to come in and say, we're abolishing private healthcare and creating universal government-only healthcare instantly. No. They're going to say, we need to get from A to Z, and we got to go through every step in between.
That kind of conspiracism is not the communist way. It's always been rejected by communists.
The communist way. What you see as communism is the tip of the iceberg. Most communist work is undone underground, in churches, in labor unions,
simplify this,
in the Democratic Party. So that is the real...
It is true that communists frequently have to do the work not entirely out in the open, because there's been a lot of anti-communist propaganda and shit. I'm sounding like a fucking Cold War era socialist, but it's true that the labels of communists and socialists are pretty heavily stigmatized, so you do have to kind of hide your power level and coalition build within existing means. The difference is that this sees that and thinks that it's dangerous subterfuge and it's like a Jewish plot to destroy the West or whatever, when really that's just how politics works, is that sometimes you have to be not entirely clear with your political intentions if it offends the existing status quo.
So to simplify this and get an appraisal of where we stand, because this is relevant to current events. Do you believe Joe Sims of the Communist Party USA influences our politicians more than AIPAC?
Yes, 100%. Way, way.
So
more.
you think Joe Sims in the Communist
As if, dude.
Party
not,
USA?
Oh boy, I
Joe,
can't
he's
wait
in
to
it.
hear
Okay,
this
so
one.
the movement, the
Right.
key people
So
around
you think
him. Yes,
you
absolutely.
think these fossilized communists who they want to basically dissolve the party as their goal and retire. You're saying that these leftovers have more power over American politics than AIPAC does?
100%.
I think that's delusional.
Well, how
I was actually about to say the exact same word of delusional, because AIPAC, okay, it is not true that Israel has any like power of the United States. The United States has functionally unlimited geopolitical influence over Israel. And I say functionally because like not actually infinite, but AIPAC is a very, very strong political organization within the United States because it's done a lot of the coalition building work over the 20th century. And they are primarily interested in the safeguarding of the national interests of Israel within the United States government. You know, like, and, you know, part of the reason it is so powerful is because it has made a bipartisan issue out of Israel. Is that, like, you know, they could go to a Democrat and a Republican and get both of them to support the same policy line on like rah support for Israel. Like, the Communist Party has no comparable presence. Believe me, if they did, you would hear about it.
How many cabinet
Everybody
how many
would hear
cabinet
about it.
secretaries has AIPAC put in power?
If any single one of them go against AIPAC's line, what happens to them? What happened to Rashida Tlaib for having a Palestine flag?
Well, what
Bro,
she
true.
should have happened
She got
to her,
censored by Congress. Why did they
Absolutely,
all
she
vote? Why did they all vote for her to be censored out of their authentic beliefs? No,
Well,
because
of social,
because they're bribed by
the
AIPAC.
Jewish vote is big.
But also, I want to say, like, it's not AIPAC. AIPAC is a component of the lobby, but the American military-industrial complex loves the foreign wars. I don't believe that AIPAC is behind why the U.S. is invading all of these different countries around the world and why they're funding Ukraine.
We can. Yeah, I think
the
that
war machine is the reason.
that's reasonable, but
I think
there
the
is.
communist movement is way more
But there
powerful
is
than
a
the
kind of
military-industrial
explicit, clear. You don't need this vast conspiracy. If you speak out against Israel, AIPAC and the Zionist lobby openly, it's not in secret. They openly go after you and try to destroy your life.
Yes, but
if
this
you're
is
a
true for
politician.
every lobby, and there's
That's
very
not,
big
that's
lobbies.
hold on. That's not true. If you speak against Turkey or if you even speak against Saudi Arabia, the consequences and the repercussions are far less severe than if you do it against Israel.
And this has more to do with American
That is
generalized
true, by
foreign
the
policy and conquest than just a single country like Israel. Israel being
Like,
a strategic location for the U.S. set up safe operations because they want to invade Iran. Securing
to-
Iraq and Afghanistan was very, very, very,
So
very
why do we
difficult.
want to invade Iran? To be clear.
Well, there's a long, long history.
With respect to like people's views on other countries being less of a danger than their views on Israel or whatever, like to themselves, it is true that like in Saudi Arabia, in any of the other countries that are horrible but we're allied to, if you speak up in those countries, you'll get disappeared, you'll get Robloxed. But in the United States, you can have those opinions, like about Turkey, about Saudi Arabia, about wherever. But if you have those opinions about Israel and the United States, if you think like, yeah, Israel's an apartheid state and I think Palestine should be free, very moderate opinion on the conflict, and you know, as far as things go, you will get blacklisted from a lot of places, like legit blacklisted, and like people will dox you and your universities will like denounce you publicly and put your name on a list. Like this is literally this has happened with university students. They've been doxed by you know, right-wing political orgs and nonprofits and whatever, and universities has been like, yeah, you guys need to stop speaking on behalf of Palestine, like you need to stop advocating for Palestinian rights and shit like that. So it's absolutely the case that like AIPAC, the influence of AIPAC and their the work that they've done in politics has been felt.
Yeah.
Of the plans the U.S. has, particularly if you look at...
Is it the communists who want to invade?
More so actually than the military-industrial complex, because unlike with the military-industrial complex, the influence and the position of Israel is actually too weak on its own to withstand the scrutiny of the public. Like public pressure can legitimately, could legitimately in a couple of different, you know, avenues, maybe lead to the United States scaling back support for Israel. The same cannot be said for the military-industrial complex at large, which is, I think, why AIPAC is given so much more attention to that, and which is probably why anti-Israel protests and pro-Palestine protests get demonized so much more intensely, is because they represent a bigger threat to the existing, you know, status quo and to American strategic interests, like in the Middle East or wherever.
Invade Iran?
I don't know what you would call it. Who wants to invade Iran? The American empirical, you know what? I think
Who wants to
the
invade
liberal
Iran?
economic order. As far as I know,
Are communists in charge of that order?
the liberal economic order?
Yeah, are communists in charge of that
I
order?
would not know.
Communists are in
China.
charge
Huge
of-
communist influence in the U.S. State
Damn.
Department.
Okay,
There's
then why
huge
do we want to
communist
invade
influence
Iran?
in the
Then why do we want to
I don't
invade
know.
Iran?
Who wants to invade Iran?
The United States.
It's very clear we want to
Well,
invade Iran.
why-
If communists are in power, why do we want to invade Iran? If communists are serving Iran, why don't we make peace with Iran instead of going to war
this
against
is
them?
why we have a nuclear deal with Iran. This is why Biden just gave them $7 billion.
Oh, we're-
Do you think
Look,
that the reason we have
it's
a
just been
new
revealed that there's a major Iranian influence operation in
Blood
Washington
sports.
that has been talked about in numerous
I'm going to press
newspapers
X to doubt.
that are in the Department.
Pressing X to doubt.
So
But
the
Press
argument-
X to
I do-
doubt.
I do want to
so
say,
the
I do want
argument
to
would
say,
be
yeah.
that communist elements in the U.S. do not want to go to war with Iran,
Right.
and American imperial interests or the liberal
true.
economic order interests, international, would want to go to
So
war.
who's in
with Iran.
power?
That's kind of
Currently,
true.
and for the longest time, it has been the liberal economic order.
So it's not
powers.
the communists.
No.
Yeah, I would not argue that communists run the entirety of the
I think it's
country.
kind of
They don't run the
delusional.
entire thing, but they're the most
Barely does that,
influential
though.
group in America.
And yet we want to go to war with Iran, and communists don't.
Yeah, but
So
influence
it's-
does not mean
America-
control.
But he's saying that they control the American
They
political
control
system.
the policy direction of the Democratic Party.
But the
at every
Democrats,
level.
the only reason we had that
No.
nuclear deal with Iran was because we were pursuing a strategy of allying with the reformist factions in Iran, which were more pro-European, more pro-Western, and this is the most important thing, they didn't want to economically couple with China. We did it to prevent Iran from integrating with China, which they have already done, which is why Joe Biden is not actually going back to the table with that deal because it's not possible. Raisi, who's a
I think that's actually true. I think that is pretty much why the United States has staked out a very oppositional position to Iran is like the number one geopolitical opponent right now is China, and then like number two is Iran, and the United States really doesn't want them becoming geopolitical allies. Because that could be like a multipolar world. And while I don't like US hegemony, I think multipolarism is even worse because then you get hegemons competing, and that leads to a massive amount of bloodshed because that would mean like more Cold War. Like the thing that the Cold War really was about, I think, on the surface you could argue like there's ideological conflict inherent to that, but it really what it was two massively powerful countries fighting for influence on the world stage. And whenever there is more than one country that has the potential to be a global hegemon, that happens. So you don't want a multipolar world in that sense.
the hardliner is in power. The reformist Rouhani is no longer in power. So we're not pursuing that strategy
This all is
anymore.
factional. Look, the mullahs are basically, they're all trained
Debate's
at
almost
Patrice
done,
Lumumba
by the
School
way, I
in
think.
Moscow. Iran is a puppet of Moscow.
You're saying the mullahs who
reason-
are from the Iranian countryside were trained in Moscow?
Dude, he was about to cite his book again. Iran's not a puppet of Russia, by the way.
Absolutely, Patrice
They're
Lumumba
not.
School in
Was
Moscow.
Khomeini-
They just both don't like America.
Was Ayatollah Khomeini trained in Moscow?
No, but several people around.
Was
him were.
Ali Khamenei the current supreme
I'm
leader?
not sure. I could check that out.
He
but I
wasn't.
know-
I'll just give you the answer. He
Well, I
wasn't.
can know many of the current leaders are. But the reason we have
Which
a nuclear
ones?
deal with
Haas is pro-Iran, by the way, one of the many areas where I think his political views are reprehensible, but no, on this he's correct. It's like, what the fuck kind of affiliation, what the fuck kind of influence does Moscow have over Iran? Like, are you kidding me?
Iran, I can provide you a list. I can
Okay.
talk to my friend.
Okay, I'd be interested in that
I-
list.
I-
Oh, you
provide
can
a
talk
list.
to
Iran
your
did not pursue
friend
a
about
pro-Soviet
it.
policy.
Very, very
That
convincing
Iran has
source.
always been a puppet of Russia, right from the
No,
revolution. The Iranian
absolutely the fuck not,
Communist
dude.
Party, the Tudeh.
Then why did they
party,
ban the Communist Party in Iran?
Because once they had taken power, Russia
Yeah,
wanted
there you
an
go.
Islamic state.
Why?
Because they didn't want. It was useful to them to have an Islamic state creating mayhem in the Middle East rather than their hands.
Was it all
on
part
it.
of the Soviet plan to dissolve itself too, or what was that? Why
Well,
did
the
that
Soviet
happen?
plan, I think, was a really
Now, if you watch
strategic.
The Simpsons,
Yeah.
you know, there's that joke where he's like, "That's just what we wanted you to think. Hit the button, and then the Soviet Union comes back."
Yeah.
There-
If
there
you-
is-
if
there-
you look- you say yourself, the Soviet
That-
Union,
that's a
Russia
good
still
gag.
has communist forms. In
The party, the Communist Party. That's what I'm
No,
referring
no,
to.
the whole society.
The
is still-
infrastructure is still from the
and
Soviet
you know,
era. Yeah.
in the Donetsk and Luhansk, they are now people's republics. They've got
Yeah.
Soviet
got 'em.
iconography.
I agree.
They're flying Russian
Yeah.
old hammer and sickle flags. So they are allied to China, which is a communist power. They're allied
Yeah.
to Cuba.
No, the legacy's there. I agree.
Yeah, it's still there.
Uh,
So
But-
and
But
it's
how
still
do they
expansion.
regard? But how do they regard people like Gorbachev and the dissolution of the Soviet Union? Do they say that was all part of the
Well,
plan, or do
yeah,
they say
it was? It was really a strategic.
But when I
but
talk-
the same people in power, the Soloviki, the intelligence services who are running things
Yeah.
under Gorbachev, are still there today. They're still.
But the
Putin is
KGB
not-
was kind of opposed to Gorbachev. They tried to get rid of Gorbachev in that hardliner coup in 1990, I believe.
Yeah, well,
but
under Khrushchev,
Putin,
So okay, this is one area where I think there's some merit to what both these guys are saying, even though like obviously I think I've said this several times already, but like they're both disingenuous actors, and you shouldn't believe any of them at like face value. But it is the case that like Russia hasn't changed that much from the days of the Soviet Union. The same people are still kind of in power that used to be. You know, like a lot of the Soviet party officials that used to be in power in did I say China? I meant Russia, like in the Soviet Union. A lot of the Soviet officials that used to be in power have now just been they stopped being party officials and they started being oligarchs because they already had like some ins to industry and like owned quite a bit of the industry and stuff. So they just like bought it up for cheap afterwards. And that's where you get that continuity of like people in the Russian government. But at the same time, Russia is disavowed, like avowedly not communist. In fact, a lot of the genuine leftist movements in Russia, you know, social democrats, socialists, communists, anarchists, have been like violently suppressed by Putin's government. The only thing that you could really consider leftist that has been permitted by the Putin, like, what is it called? One Russia or something, government, is the Nazbol party, which is like, you really probably wouldn't consider them to be a left party, I think, or I think you shouldn't consider them a left party anyways, you know.
But Putin himself says that the dissolution of the Soviet Union was a tragedy and was a mistake.
Absolutely.
So how can you say that it was the plan of the Soviet Union to dissolve itself?
It was a strategic.
That's true. You know, Putin saying that, and that actually being a pretty widely held sentiment in Russia in particular, is very indicative that was like they didn't want to dissolve the Soviet Union. The Soviet government didn't want to dissolve the Soviet Union, but like people voted to do that, and then now people are like have the nationalistic sort of rose-tinted lens.
Retreat. They were under huge pressure.
What created that retreat specifically?
Well, they were under huge pressure from the West, economically, for one,
How?
and internal.
So who's? But I thought the West was controlled by communists. So
we're
who's
talking
pulling the
under
string?
Reagan here.
So
it's a
Reagan,
little bit different.
So Reagan got rid of all the communists in control. To be clear.
No, not all of it, but he had a major impact, just like Trump.
This guy's argument is incoherent. It's becoming evident pretty quick. The West is in control, is controlled by communists, but also the Soviet Union dissolved under the stewardess of the mighty capitalist West that was controlled by communists, and Russia is communist still, even though the
had a major impact.
I can't really explain it.
But when the Democrats in power,
sense.
the communist foreign policy pretty much isn't.
So would you say that
today.
Reagan was this independent populist, not beholden to the interests of the oligarchical elites?
I'd say he had more independence than most American presidents, just as Trump had.
This is absolutely false. Reagan was probably the most puppet president until Bush Jr.
Had more. I'm not saying totally. He still had George Bush on his, as VP, but he was more independent and stronger against communism than any other American.
So you don't believe that
Oh, boy,
anti-communism was a real policy of the deep state after the Cold War?
It was in some aspects. Like
Why did we launder money to fund fascist, neo-Nazi, anti-communist mercenaries in Africa, death squads in Latin America,
The word
Greek
just used is
military
fascist.
junta?
I don't regard Savimbi as a fascist.
Well, but we did fund fascist.
There you go. This guy is fascist, by the way. But like the reason he's saying, I don't regard them as fascists, because he understands that fascism is a bad word, and he just doesn't want them associated with that bad word. But like, we did fund a lot of fascist militant groups and like militias in the 20th centuries that like fucked up the global South to an insane degree. Like, legit, if it weren't for the United States, a lot of the global South might have like actually been able to catch up in some appreciable fashion, but it didn't happen, unfortunately. I'm gonna use this when I land.
Communist fascists, to be clear, throughout the developing world.
I think
We helped fund the
quick.
genocide in Indonesia.
just like the Soviet.
I think
That's
this is missing a
true, we
big,
did
a
that
big,
as well.
a big picture here.
We supplied them
The
arms,
people who
too.
control systems don't
Yeah.
care what you call it. The United States
I
is
agree.
going to fund whatever they want to fund to remain in power,
agree.
be it communism or
I
otherwise.
agree. I just don't think
Same
it
is
makes
true for the Soviets. And
I just
China.
don't agree that it makes sense that communists, as opposed to the people who actually control the means of life, are in power. I just don't agree with that.
Well, why have we got Obamacare? Why have we got a new?
We have
If you
Obama-
want to read, if
Bro,
you wanna
that
know what
was
the
a
Democrats are gonna do tomorrow,
conservative,
read the
liberal,
Communist Press
like,
today,
proposal.
Well,
because they were
here's-
talking about socialized healthcare for years. They got it implemented through Physicians for a National Health Program.
I
They got
disagree,
it
though.
implemented through
But
the.
Bernie came out opposing
basis
the Obamacare system and wanted to
Yeah,
implement
because it
single
wasn't
payer.
strong enough.
But
It
why
was
did
an
here's the
interim- it was
question?
an interim
I do
step.
agree that Obama was a popular candidate. He was.
Wait, okay, so this guy's saying like, oh, Bernie only opposed it because it wasn't strong enough. Damn, isn't that an indication then that it's not socialist because Bernie is a socialist? Or at least he calls himself as such. I've heard some people disagree whether he's socialist or social democrat, but like, if anything, Bernie saying like this is flawed and not strong enough for what we need is an indication that like, yeah, no, this isn't a socialist policy
a people's choice. I do think that in 2008. But then what happened? He got into power, and what did he do? Instead of fighting, he compromised. And Obamacare was that compromise.
Yeah, exactly. But it was a step towards socialism.
But,
so it's
but
incremental. You take what you can
But that
get.
was a grassroots movement.
Grassroots movement completely orchestrated by Democratic Socialist America and CPUSA.
But the DSA didn't start gaining traction until after Bernie repopularized
No,
the term.
they were heavily involved.
Look at the membership of DSA pre 2016.
It was about in the period where they had a lot of influence, about 84 to 90. The membership was about 12,000. Lenin took over the Soviet Russia with 2,000 people.
Right, but I think
the numbers are irrelevant. It is the influence. They took over the labor unions in 1994. That is proven fact. They removed the anti-communist clause from the AFL-CIO's constitution. The old 60s communists came flooding in. Every major labor union in the country now is controlled by Marxists and communists and Leninists, and they dictate the policies of the Democratic
disagree.
Party.
I think you're conflating progressives, which is preceding
I'm talking
hold on.
Marxist and Marxist.
Wait, but hold on. But Democratic politicians since the 40s, who were not communists, who were not Marxists, drawing from the legacy of the progressive movement in the U.S., they had nothing to do with Marxism, they had nothing to do with the CPUSA, and they believed in universal health care, right?
No, that's not true.
So I'm just trying to say, yes, Obama did draw a new platform because of overwhelming dissatisfaction with the hegemonic Democrat and Republican positions. Remember, he was running against Hillary Clinton, a mainstream Democrat, in 2008.
She's not a mainstream.
Well, at the time she was compared to him, right? So yes, there was a lot of new ideas Obama brought to the table, but as we see, all of those ideas went into the dumpster.
All of those ideas come out of the market.
That's true, by the way. A lot of the progressive promises that Obama made on the campaign trail in 2008, he pretty solidly reneged upon.
Marxist movement. Open borders
not true.
was a Marxist. Absolutely
open borders is rejected.
Eliseo Medina, a Marxist who changed the AFL-CIO's policy in 2000 at their conference in Los Angeles from anti-illegal immigration to pro-illegal immigration.
But concretely, that meant
Obamacare was completely 100% a Marxist.
But hold on. That doesn't mean that they're the ones who created open borders. The people who created open borders was the capitalist class.
It was the communists who got the Democrats to flip their policy from opposing illegal immigration to supporting it.
Okay.
That's not true. I only wish the Democrats supported and were accommodating of illegal immigration, but they're not.
Did illegal immigration accelerate or decrease under George W. Bush?
I'm sorry, hold on. The CPUSA is for open borders. I went to their website.
Hold on. To be clear, yes, the CPUSA is everything the Democrats believe in, the CPUSA does. But I reject the view that the open borders policy originates with the CPUSA and the DSA.
Massive. Look, there's two constituencies for illegal immigration. There is the Chamber of Commerce element who wants cheap labor. There's the left-wing Democrat element who wants a revolutionary wage and a massive increase of votes for the Democrats.
So which one do you think is more powerful?
Oh, absolutely.
I didn't hear what he said, but it's probably some white replacement theory shit.
There's two constituencies for illegal immigration. There is a massive increase of votes for the Democrats.
So which one do you think is more powerful?
Oh, okay. So it's Democrats want immigration because of more votes. You know, funnily enough, a lot of immigrants tend to vote Republican, like first-generation Americans and stuff. Insert meme about the two Wojaks that both are brown and look the same, but one has an American flag T-shirt and one has a Mexican flag T-shirt.
There was always an illegal immigration problem.
Let me ask you a question.
Eisenhower deported 3 million of them. It crept up. Reagan stupidly put an amnesty.
Was he a communist?
No, but he just did a stupid thing.
Why did he do it?
Probably responding to business pressure.
Well, here's a question for you.
But also the left.
Why is
it has massively accelerated. Nobody can deny
that
illegal immigration
has to add,
massively accelerated
the
under Obama,
also.
then even
and
more
under George W.
That's right.
Way more than George W.
And so the issue particularly for me and what I see is that I'm not going to say argue communists are controlling everything, but certainly their whims are more likely to be met, especially as progressives. I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
We're looking at Enrique Tarrio, who's they call him a fascist, who was not even in D.C. getting 22 years in prison for a thing he wasn't at. Why? Because he posted a tweet. Not a tweet. It was a Getter post or something like that, or a Parler post. Meanwhile, the people who are outside the White House who firebombed it, of leftist persuasion, the people outside of the federal buildings, very little is done to curtail any of that. So there is this thing we've been seeing where I can go to a journalist we have on the show and I say, why do you think it is that the feds are not going so heavily after the people who firebombed the White House on 5/29? And he goes, the what? He doesn't even know what happened. And then we actually do see this right now in all of our media institutions. Overt Marxist influences is prevalent. So I worked for numerous media organizations, and we hear it all the time. People who are classically liberal, constitutionally Republican, or even people who are alt-right nationalists hide their views.
I genuinely
overtly communist proudly.
Genuinely, I don't know what Tim Pool is talking about here, and I think he's like, if I had to guess, he's trying to make some argument about communists have the institutional preference from the government, which is not true. Although I guess if you were to say, relative to Nazis, then maybe, but I seriously don't think you could seriously. I don't think you could actually make the argument that communists have any sort of into the government that him is saying that they do, because again, the aims of communists are partially the abolition of the state, or at least the seizure of it by the proletariat and whatever.
They state it, and they even have single and hammer patches.
Unless They're like me or Jackson, and in which case they're censored from everything. So there's a reason for that, okay? Communists who completely toe the line of the liberal hegemony, and I agree, they're good sellouts. They're effective at being sellouts. But yes, as long as you toe the line of liberal hegemony, you can be a neo-Nazi, as in the case of Ukraine. You can call yourself a communist. You can call yourself an anarchist. You can call yourself literally whatever you want, and nothing bad will happen to you. If you're critical of our policy with regard to Ukraine, which, by the way, internationally is the norm for communists, just not in America, I guess, then you're also going to be censored and under attack. There's someone
Or critical of Israel and a communist.
Listen, there's someone who I don't even agree with, right? His name is Second Thought. He has a YouTube channel, and we're like enemies, right? But even he is now starting to get deplatformed from, I forget which subscription service it is.
Second Thought is red fascist. I would describe him as. His videos have gotten worse and worse over time, and he's gotten openly into like praising Stalin and genocide denial over the Holodomor and stuff lately.
Because of his views on wars and because of his views on history.
Kind of crazy, because him and Haas would agree on a lot.
And things like that. And look, if I go to academia as a Stalinist, okay, it's not going to be pretty for me. If I go to academia as a intersectional post-Marxist, transgender theorist, everything will be fine, because it's all about submission to the Democratic Party. Now, what I do...
Okay, this is conspiracy brain kicking in. It is true that, like, being a Stalinist generally doesn't fly in academia anymore, like it used to in the 1950s and 60s. But really, it's just not a good idea. But, the reason you can be a more liberal theorist and have a more specific niche is because that's probably more valid than being a Stalinist. The Democratic Party has very little influence in academia, and in fact, they care very little about it. That's evident in the kind of policies that they pursue, because we see study after study indicating, like, universal basic income, that's good, actually. Government-provided housing, rent-controlled, price-controlled, that's good, actually. Having, like, municipally owned infrastructure, that's good, actually. Sociologists and political scientists, whatever, can pump out studies like that. And then Democrats will look at that and be like, huh, that's interesting. Let's get a committee to explore if we could do another study on this, and then they never come back to it.
To agree with is that the Democratic Party has more hegemony than the Republican Party. The Democratic Party controls the institutions, they control the media, they control the culture. The Republicans, they're obviously corrupt and funded by lobbyists and stuff, but what they do is kind of starting to more capture dissent.
Right. See, the Democratic Party has more hegemony.
No. Okay, this is them like doing
unions
the
control them and the communists control
shit.
You and Jackson are a very tiny subset of the communist movement. Very tiny subset.
But that's
the communist
the
movement of this country is probably 200,000 or 300,000 strong. If you
disagree.
If you bring all the people, you bring.
Well, what are you saying about like the Democratic versus Republican Party controlling everything? That's like pretty bullshit. If anything, the right wing has a much larger presence in the media space than the left wing does. And this is borne out kind of through Fox News' like hegemony over the news that they had for the longest time, and that's only just now slipping. And of course, like, when that started happening, when their hegemony started slipping, what happened? Did the left wing all of a sudden become hegemonic in the news world? No. And there was just an existing news outlet that started to drift to the right and like try to become the next Fox News. Obviously, both parties have like affiliated news media outlets. That kind of thing tends to happen in very complex political systems, but like, ultimately, the news is privately owned and controlled by the same class that control everything else, including the two parties.
DSA into it. Freedom Road, Party for Social.
Freedom Road is tiny. I don't know.
But let's just make this distinction. What you're referring to is MAGA communism, and let's refer to what the higher hierarchical, more influential communist or Marxist.
Get me out of there.
Woke left.
Well, here's the I mean, I kind of agree with that, but my one problem is it's like the issue of the cause and effect. Because let's ask a simple question. You don't have to agree with metaphysical materialism, but who is funding all this shit? Where does the money come from? Like, for example, me and Jackson, the reason we have a hard time and they have an easy time is because billionaires fund these people, right?
Yep.
And if billionaires fund you, you obviously have to conform to what billionaires want you to say and want you to implement, right? Yeah. Me and Jackson don't do that, so we have a harder time. So my question to you is, if this is a communist movement, where does the communist money come from?
It comes through the Democracy Alliance, which is Steve Phillips, which is Tom Steyer. They are funding the left to the tune of billions of dollars.
So you're saying there's secret communist billionaires?
There are different kinds of communism.
Absolutely.
He said secret communist billionaires, and he was like, yeah, that's exactly what I believe. Fucking completely unserious. Look, the one billionaire that all the right-wingers point to all the time as being amiable to left-wing causes is George Soros, right? It's sometimes Bill Gates, but even they know that they're pretty much talking shit in that case. I'll finish the rest of this off the races. Like, and George Soros they mention him because he's Jewish, of course. But George Soros is not a communist. He's not a socialist. He's a liberal. In fact, he was involved with the shock doctrine in Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union, which he says was, very unfortunate. He says like that there were a lot of things that went very wrong, and we shouldn't have done the shock therapy as harshly as we did. We should have done things differently, whatever. And then on the right, you have basically every other billionaire. Like George Soros is the one guy who's remotely active within promoting left-wing causes with his money, and he's a liberal. There are no socialist or communist billionaires, and if there were, you'd probably hear about it. Like Haas said earlier, a communist deign to
many.
You look.
Steve Phillips.
Is George Soros one of them?
George Soros is a supporter and funder of the left.
Is he a communist?
This is what I'll say. George Soros was a little Jewish boy
See, he can't say it. Oh, well, he did mention he was Jewish.
in Hungary during World War II.
Yeah.
His father fostered him out to a Catholic family, I believe, to protect him from the Nazis.
Yeah.
He used to go around confiscating Jewish properties with his foster father. He was effectively working with the capos.
I'm aware.
Yeah, that's pretty fucked up. Look, me saying that right-wingers are only interested in George Soros because he's Jewish is not a defense of Soros. He's a billionaire, so by definition, he's done some fucked up shit.
So after World War II, the Soviet Red Army took over Hungary and they were hanging Nazi collaborators or turning them to work for them. George Soros was allowed to leave Soviet-occupied Hungary, travel through Soviet-occupied Austria, out to the West. How would someone who'd worked with a Nazi collaborator be allowed to do that had they not made a deal with the
There's
authorities?
one missing piece of that puzzle. Why did George Soros use his money to participate in the color revolution, the springtime of peoples of the 80s, which took down the communist states of the Warsaw Pact?
No, what it did was set up civil institutions in those...
That's true, by the way. The part about color revolutions isn't true because color revolution equals revolution that I don't like and is therefore CIA. Those revolutions in the 1980s were pretty genuine across the Eastern Bloc because living conditions there were very dire post 1960s and 70s. But George Soros being involved in those, like I said, he's involved with a lot of stuff. He donates his money to various things. Usually they're like very obliquely, tangentially related to politics. But the point stands. If he's involved in the revolutions that brought down the communist states, then how is he a communist, right?
places to preserve...
Of course, I think there's not, you could still be a communist and dislike the Warsaw Pact and Russia and all that, but, that's a side thing. Operating on this guy's own logic, his arguments don't make
socialist
sense.
thought. We have this illusion with George Soros and his Open Societies Institute that he fought communism in Eastern Europe. He set up institutions which were then colonized by socialists
you can call
to
it...
keep the socialist dream alive.
Sure.
In this country and everywhere around the world,
Jesus.
he supported the left everywhere you go.
So I think there's this kind of gap of terminology because I want to give you my perspective. If I'm a Romanian factory worker, and socialism for me means I have a job, there's infrastructure, there's a source of living for me, I can have some kind of family, the baseline of my needs are met, and that's the socialist system. And then suddenly all of that is overthrown, and there's a neoliberal hellscape where my daughters are being trafficked into sex trafficking, everything becomes privatized, I can't afford anything, I can't get by with any job, I have to move and migrate out. I mean, you can say, oh, that's socialist thought. That's
Good stream made me think a lot. Gotta run. Yeah, I'll see you when I see it. And thanks for coming out for this stream.
socialism. Well, in content, materially speaking, why would you call that the same thing? It's completely different.
But I think we've already made this point. It's that there are people who feel there's a means that the ends justify the means, and therefore there are people who are communists who want this ideal version of communism to be implemented that are utilizing the destruction of society and the working class to create pressure, which pushes them into a.
Watch more of you whenever you're
system.
live for sure. Oh well, thanks. Thank you. Glad to know I've made somebody else interested in my content.
But that's not what's happening.
But real communism is not about sharing the wealth or building a great society. Real communism is centralizing all wealth and all power.
Real communism proceeds to describe communism. Real communism is what I say it is, which is describes capitalism.
A very few hands.
But hold on.
It's just fluff.
But hold on. My point is, and that may be what we see practically, but even for you, with a more idealistic version of a working system,
I don't think it's
so many
idealistic.
right-wingers do that, man. They'll say oh, I hate communism because, and then they list the reasons why capitalism is bad, and they'd it's like you just described capitalism, dude.
Saying an ideal version of communism in your mind.
It's not ideal. It's the real experience.
Okay, so there's someone who says, in order to get from here to the real experience, we have to break down the capitalist structures to create this. There's only one way.
Yes. By the way, that is how you transition into a socialist or communist world. You have to break down the norms and structures of capitalism in order to do that. The two systems are fundamentally incompatible.
To do it, you have to step by step erode and destroy people's lives in the process.
So Mao.
No, you don't erode and destroy people's lives. You erode and destroy the institutions that perpetuate the system of production that puts the bourgeois on top and everybody else at the bottom, which means that capitalists, property owners, wealthy property owners, will probably be expropriated at some stage or through some manner of processes. But that expropriation will be for the purpose of enfranchising with common property, commonly held, democratically controlled. That will enfranchise the people who were previously propertyless, who did not have like these giant stock portfolios and businesses and whatever. A lot of this ultimately, one thing I've noticed every time this comes up is that when we say like expropriate the capitalists, we're talking about private property, not personal property. This computer, the computer that I have right now, that is my personal property. It is a thing that I own and use just for fun. I do things on it. It is not private property. Private property would be if I owned something as an investment vehicle and was making a substantial amount of money off it. If this computer perhaps were made of gold and I used it to try to speculate on certain things in the marketplace. If I tried to sell it to somebody and was only interested in it for its monetary value and then use that money to reinvest, that is private property. Same thing with like with businesses and whatever. More so this applies to businesses where private property, something is like you owning not so much a thing as a concept, right? And like you saying any interaction with this concept is actually my property. So you doing work at the factory that I own is actually, your labor is now my property and I am entitled to the monetary proceeds of that, if that makes sense. Just owning like a phone, this isn't private property. This is personal property. This house could be considered private property, in which case it would be owned publicly and you wouldn't need to engage with the practice of buying and selling it in order to live there.
And North Korea did not need to fund LGBT to have communism in Korea. Or,
no, not in those.
Every system's different.
Those you know, they
but they did. We did a cultural revolution and a disruptive.
But the cultural revolution was not like overthrowing basic like sexual norms and basic.
Whatever's needed to destroy the social system.
Because
no,
they were in power. They just wanted to use the youth to eradicate former bourgeois concepts to create a new man.
No.
Just like Pol Pot did in Cambodia, where they killed a third of the
Red Guards targeted Communist Party bosses and leaders more than anyone else.
Those who weren't sufficiently enthusiastic.
No, it was because, this is the actual reason, China imported initially its system from the Soviets, which was foreign imported, and therefore you had a bureaucracy within China not in touch with the masses. So the Cultural Revolution was launched in order to actually make socialism in China Chinese in content and actually humble these bosses and bureaucrats and submit them to a popular will.
No, submit them to the absolute.
Yeah, I mean, by the way, what Haas is describing here really is like a very heavily narrativized version of like China borrowing the fascist system that the Soviets did with unelected and democratically unaccountable bureaucrats and this like infrastructure of a modern authoritarian state with none of the democratic levers of power and no public ownership and collective ownership of the means of production. It was just basically capitalism, but now things are owned by an unelected state instead of like business magnates.
Absolute rule of those in power.
Which was
this is always, communists always put this idealistic spin on tyranny. Well, we did it in the name of the people. We had to destroy these bourgeois elements. We had to destroy those who weren't sufficiently revolutionary. It is all about naked power. Revolution is about
whose power? I agree.
The leadership of the Communist Party.
But what did that amount to? But as Dong Ping Han writes in his book, that power concretely amounted to increased autonomy and self-governance of the Chinese peasants.
Absolute garbage.
Okay, well, I implore you to read the book.
It resulted in the complete control over all aspects of life by the CCP.
The historical facts disagree.
Okay, now, gentlemen.
Well,
At the time, that might have been correct. Things worsened in China over time with respect to authoritarianism. I mean, things were pretty bad from the outset with the I think the famine, like that resulted in 20 million-ish people dying in China. That was really bad. But it was certainly the case that there was a time where there was genuine revolutionary hope for China. And what this guy's describing is basically socialism is rotten from the outset, and it's all about power. He's basically saying that, oh, I read 1984 and Ingsoc is bad. Therefore, that's what all socialism is like. This is an accurate description of how opportunists come into power and corrupt socialist movements for their own gains. But at that point, it ceases to be socialism because the essential character of the meaning of socialism is a democratic ownership over the means of production. When you don't have that, you don't have socialism. You have something else. In this case, fascism.
We unfortunately have gone a half hour over because I think we did have a great conversation.
Yeah.
All right, well, I certainly don't think we can hash out the entirety of the circumstances in a couple hours, but gentlemen, thank you for coming. I think this was an absolute blast. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. We've done it. We have solved National Bolshevism. We have solved communism. We've solved socialism. We've solved fascism. We have solved politics. Thanks for turning out for this. Very, very, very tiring set of streams. Well, I guess I look forward to another debate to review, because that stuff is fun, as difficult as it is. And I will now find somebody to raid if they are live. Dude, the simple flip. Okay. Lethal Company, big sweaty gamers. You know what, actually? Maybe I won't raid somebody today. Yeah, there's people I typically raid, and they're not live right now. So I will just see you guys next time, that being on Friday. I'll be back on Friday. Since the debate is done, I won't be reviewing that anymore. I will rather be just playing this game and talking about other various political topics. So see you then.